Status recalculation in real time. Walk into a room where a friend is mid-conversation with someone you don't recognize and watch what happens next. Their whole energy shifts. They turn slightly away from the stranger. Language becomes more careful. They laugh a bit harder at your joke than they would alone. It's not malice. It's something automatic and primal. They just recalculated your status relative to theirs, and the room rearranged itself in milliseconds. Your brain contains a mental balance sheet for every person in your life, where they sit relative to you on competence, wealth, attractiveness, power, belonging. The moment circumstances change that calculus, the way people treat you changes too. A promotion shifts things. A visible failure, a new friendship, a weight loss, a connection to someone powerful. Here's what makes it tricky. People don't always know they're doing it. They experience the shift as genuine. Suddenly they're being themselves around you differently, when really their estimation of your value just moved. It can feel like betrayal when it's actually just neurology firing underneath the surface. Your ex-coworker becomes warmer after you get hired somewhere prestigious. Your confident friend goes quieter when you land the opportunity they wanted. A group makes space for you when you're with someone they respect, then contracts when you're alone. A person who ignored you for years suddenly texts after they see your work get recognition. None of this means they're bad people. It means they're human, and humans are status-tracking animals built by evolution to know where they stand in the hierarchy. The move here isn't to judge them for it. It's to recognize it's happening, so you stop taking the temperature swings personally. When someone's energy around you shifts, ask yourself what just changed in how they see your relative positions. That small shift in attention often reveals the real story underneath. You'll find the answer has less to do with who you are and everything to do with what you represent in that moment and what they suddenly need from you or fear losing to you. The third person changes everything. Watch what happens the moment a third person enters a conversation. You've been talking to your partner, relaxed, joking about something private or real. Then a friend shows up. The air shifts, the tone tightens. Maybe you both laugh less. Maybe you become a different version of yourself. More careful, more defended, performing a role that fits the group instead of the intimacy that was there before. That third presence isn't just another body in the room. It's a mirror that forces you to become conscious of yourself in ways you weren't a moment before. Psychologists call this social inhibition, but the name doesn't catch what's really happening. Your brain switches modes entirely. One-on-one, you're in a shared world with another person. Your guard is lower because stakes feel contained, private, safe. Add a witness, and suddenly you're aware of being watched, not just heard, but assessed. You're no longer just connecting, you're being evaluated. The third person becomes the implicit audience, and audiences change how we perform. You start monitoring yourself, filtering language, curating which parts of your personality get airtime, which get locked away. This is why couples fight differently alone than in public. Why you're looser with one friend than with two. Why your parent acts unlike themselves when someone else is present. Why people you've known for years seem suddenly guarded when their boss walks in. The third person isn't changing anyone's character. They're activating a different social script that was already inside, waiting in the wings. Here's what gets sticky. Most people don't notice this shift in real time. They blame the person who changed instead of recognizing that context itself is shape-shifting everyone involved. The next time someone feels different around you, before you decide they've turned cold or fake, ask yourself, who else is in the room? What invisible audience are they performing for? Understanding this won't make rejection hurt less, but it might keep you from taking a costume change for a change of heart. Sudden warmth as a threat signal. Remember the coworker who barely looked at you for months, then suddenly started texting you jokes and inviting you to lunch. Your first instinct was relief. Finally, they like you, but that shift, that unexpected thaw, can sometimes be the moment to pay the closest attention, not relax. Humans are animals with very old instincts, and one of them lives in your body right now. When someone changes their temperature toward you fast, your nervous system should notice. It often means something shifted in how they see you relative to their needs or their threat landscape. Maybe you became useful. Maybe you stopped being useful, and now they need you to not become an enemy. Maybe they want something they've wanted for a while, and only now do they feel safe to ask. The danger isn't that warmth is always fake. Sometimes it's genuinely earned and real, but sudden, unearned warmth often arrives with an invisible agenda tucked underneath. You feel the relief. You lower the guard you didn't know you had. And then, when the request comes, the favor, the loan, the truth they need you to keep quiet about, it lands inside the trust they just manufactured. This is especially potent if the person had reason to fear you or compete with you. The fastest way to disarm someone is to become their friend. The fastest way to become their friend is to turn up the warmth dial and hold it steady. So here is the move. When someone shifts toward you suddenly, don't reach back immediately. Sit with it for a few days. Notice if the warmth feels anchored to something real about who you are or what you've done, or if it feels strategic, calibrated, aimed. Notice if they're warmer when others are watching. Notice if the warmth comes right before a big ask. Your instinct to trust is beautiful and deeply social. Your instinct to notice the shape of the warmth before you walk into it is survival. Let both run at once. Mirroring collapse. You know that thing where you can be laughing with someone, matching their energy perfectly, and then suddenly, mid-sentence, they shift. Their face tightens, their voice flattens, and you're left standing there wondering what you did wrong, when literally nothing in the conversation changed. What just happened is called mirroring collapse, and it's one of the strangest betrayals of human connection, because it feels deliberate, even when it's unconscious. Here's what's actually going on. Most people mirror the people around them without knowing it. Posture, pace of speech, even breathing patterns. It's how we signal safety, belonging, and trust. But mirroring only works when both people are unconsciously doing it together. The moment one person becomes self-aware, usually because they've suddenly remembered something that makes them anxious, or because their phone buzzed with bad news, or because they caught themselves enjoying someone's company when they decided they shouldn't, the whole thing collapses. They stop mirroring, they become stiff, and you, who was matching their rhythm, suddenly feel the absence like a door closing in your face. The trap is thinking you caused it. You didn't. What you're witnessing is someone's internal state crashing, and you're just the mirror that suddenly shows the truth of it. They were never fully present with you. They were holding something back. The collapse happens when they lose the energy to keep pretending, when some internal alarm goes off and yanks them back into their own head. This is actually useful information, though it stings in the moment. When someone's mirroring collapses around you, it usually means they're overwhelmed, guilty about something, or protecting themselves from feeling too close. It's not about you being wrong. It's about them becoming aware of something they need to hide or manage alone. If you notice it happening, the quietest move is to slow down, drop your own performance, and sit with the awkwardness without trying to fix it. Sometimes people need to know it's safe to stop mirroring before they can be real again. The audience effect. You know that friend who's a riot one-on-one but somehow quieter in a group, or the colleague who suddenly gets sharper, funnier, almost a different person the moment their boss walks into the room. That's not them being fake, exactly. It's neuroscience doing what it does best, rewiring your behavior based on who's watching. When other people are present, your brain treats it like a performance eval, not consciously, mind you. It happens in the background, in the nervous system, before you even know it's started. Studies going back decades show that people run faster on a track when observers are nearby, but they fumble more at complex tasks under the same conditions. It's not stage fright alone. It's that the presence of eyes activates your arousal system, sharpens focus on what you do well, and simultaneously hijacks the parts of your brain that handle fine motor skills and nuance. Your amygdala lights up, cortisol rises a notch, and suddenly, simple, overlearned things feel easy, while anything new or intricate feels like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake. This is why your kid might crush their math homework at the kitchen table, but freeze during the spelling bee, or why you nail the presentation in rehearsal, but stammer when the actual room fills up. The audience effect doesn't care about your actual competence. It cares about your nervous system's threat detection. And here's the wicked part. We forget this happens to other people too. You see your boss get tense, and you read it as meanness or coldness. You watch your partner clam up at a dinner party, and you feel rejected, but they're just experiencing what you experience. A biological response to being seen. The move isn't to fight it head on. It's to know it's there, to soften the stories you build around how people change, and to realize that the person in front of you right now isn't the only version they contain. In-group switching mid-conversation. You've noticed it happens in seconds. A friend is telling you something private, intimate, real, And then their colleague walks in. Suddenly, their voice changes pitch. The words become sharper, faster, less careful. They're still talking to you, but they're not talking at you anymore. They're performing for the room. What just happened is not betrayal. It's neurology meeting social survival. Your brain is built to code switch, to flip the dial instantly based on who's in the room, what group you're defending, what identity needs protecting. The scientific term is in-group bias activation, but what it actually feels like is watching someone become a slightly different person mid-sentence. The person you trusted with a confession 5 minutes ago suddenly seems like a stranger who happens to share your name. Here's the cruel part. They probably don't even notice they did it. Your brain is so fast at detecting audience composition that it rewires your behavior before conscious thought catches up. A parent becomes one person with their kids, another with their boss, another with their old college friends. Mixing groups, bringing two tribes into the same room, creates a low-grade panic in the nervous system. Which version of me do I activate? Which rules apply now? Which secrets are safe? So the mind defaults to a protected self, the one that keeps maximum information close, that trades authenticity for safety. This is not character weakness. It's a feature built into every human who's ever had to navigate more than one world. But it also means you are constantly meeting edited versions of people, even the ones you think you know well. The next time someone shifts on you mid-conversation, you're not watching fickleness. You're watching their nervous system make a very fast calculation about whose approval matters most in that exact moment. Understanding this doesn't make it hurt less, but it does make it less personal. And sometimes, that distance is exactly what keeps you standing. Loyalty triangulation. Watch what happens at a dinner table when someone tells a story about their best friend while that friend sits right there. The laugh comes a beat too late, or a detail gets added that quietly shifts the whole thing. Or, worst of all, silence lands where you expected warmth. What you're witnessing is loyalty triangulation, and it's the shape most relationships bend into when a third person becomes the messenger instead of the problem solver. It happens when two people can't resolve something between them directly, so one recruits a third to tip the balance, prove a point, or validate their hurt. It rarely feels calculated. You complain to your sibling about your partner because saying it face-to-face feels too risky. You mention to a coworker how much better the old manager was, hoping the comment travels. You text a friend venting about your boss instead of naming the issue in the actual conversation. The third person becomes a proxy, a borrowed voice for the conflict you're too afraid or angry to voice yourself. Here's the trap nobody mentions. Nobody actually wins. The person you're recruiting gets exhausted being a message carrier. They're holding your anger, your hurt, your unspoken resentment, and it weighs. The person you're complaining about eventually learns what was said, and it lands not as feedback, but as betrayal. And you never fix the original problem because you never said it to the person who could actually change or understand. What makes triangulation feel smart is that it mimics safety. Going straight feels confrontational, risky, demanding, but that safety is a trick. It just extends the conflict, adds shame to the eventual landing, and erodes trust in both directions. The real cost isn't the drama that follows, it's that you train yourself to run sideways instead of forward. Next time you feel that urge to vent about someone to someone else, pause and notice where it comes from. Are you avoiding a hard conversation? If yes, that avoidance is your real problem, not the third person you're about to recruit as referee. Loyalty doesn't live in triangles. It lives in people brave enough to say what they need to the person who needs to hear it. The confidant reversal. You tell someone your secret, something real, something that took courage, and suddenly they feel closer to you. Not because they shared back right away, but because you trusted them first. That asymmetry is magnetic. You've handed them a piece of you that mattered, and your nervous system reads their acceptance as proof they're safe. So you open more, and then one day they mention something you said to someone else, or they make a joke that lands different now, or they simply don't ask how you're doing the way they used to. The shift is subtle, but your body knows. The person you made vulnerable to has shifted your utility. You're no longer the mysterious one they were curious about. You're the person with edges they've already seen. The thrill of discovery is gone. Confidants have a weird shelf life because we're wired to fetch novelty and depth from different people. The friend who holds your secrets becomes familiar. Familiar becomes invisible. Invisible becomes easy to disappoint. What makes it worse is the silence. They won't tell you the change happened because they probably don't know it consciously. You just notice the lag in their texts, the way conversations stall, the feeling that you've somehow become less interesting now that they know you're human. Here's the trap. You might respond by sharing even more, thinking vulnerability will rebuild the intimacy. It won't. It'll just speed up the invisibility. The reversal isn't about you being too needy or too broken. It's about how intimacy and intrigue operate on different switches in the human brain. Someone can love you genuinely and still feel the subtle drop in magnetic pull once mystery is gone. The move isn't to stop trusting people. It's to notice when a relationship has shifted from discovery to maintenance and adjust your expectations before resentment grows teeth. Sometimes the person who holds your secrets is meant to hold them lightly, and that's enough. Gossip as coalition testing. You're at lunch with someone who suddenly starts telling you an unflattering story about a mutual friend. Nothing cruel, just observations, a detail about how they handled a situation, what they said when they thought no one was listening, and you notice yourself frozen for a second, unsure whether to nod along or pull back. That moment of hesitation is actually you sensing something real. The gossiper isn't just killing time, they're testing whether you're part of their tribe. Gossip is coalition architecture disguised as small talk. When someone shares a criticism or private detail about someone else, they're doing something far more calculated than venting. They're checking if you'll validate their version of reality, which is the same as checking if you're safe to trust with secrets of your own. If you laugh and add your own story, you've just signaled, "We see the world the same way, and I won't expose you." You're in. If you stay quiet or defend the person, you've communicated the opposite. Maybe you're loyal to them instead, or you're the type who runs straight to management. That makes you unreliable for the coalition. This is why gossip feels so binding. It's not the information that cements loyalty. It's the mutual vulnerability of having shared something you wouldn't say in public. You've both put something on the table that could damage you if it got out. That's a handshake. The trap is mistaking this for actual closeness. You can spend months bonding over someone else's flaws and still know almost nothing real about the person sitting across from you. The coalition formed is real. The friendship might not be. The next time someone leans in with a story, try something different. Notice what you're actually being asked to join. It's not a conversation about your mutual friend. It's a test of where your loyalty lives and whether you're someone safe enough to keep around. Reputation cascade contagion. Think back to the last time someone you trusted told you something ugly about another person. Not a fact, just a whisper that they weren't who you thought. Notice how your whole image of that person shifted before you'd seen any evidence yourself. You didn't fact-check it. You didn't ask follow-up questions. You just absorbed their version, and it stuck. That moment is the seed of reputation cascade contagion, and it spreads faster than you'd ever suspect. Here's how it actually works. One person shares a doubt, a criticism, or a half-remembered story about someone else. That doubt isn't neutral anymore. It's now linked to a person you trust, someone whose judgment you've already borrowed 1,000 times. So when you pass that story along to someone else, you're not just repeating gossip, you're laundering it through your credibility. The next person hears it from you, not from the original source, and it feels more solid because of that transfer. Your endorsement, even the quiet endorsement of just repeating it, becomes part of the story's weight. A few cycles of this, and the original doubt has calcified into everyone knows territory. The person in question hasn't actually changed. They haven't done anything new, but their reputation has shifted in the minds of dozens of people who've never had a single real interaction with them. What makes this particularly sticky is that correction almost never catches up. One person saying, "Wait, that's not fair," sounds weak next to a chorus of, "Yeah, I heard that too." The cascade has momentum now. Your brain codes it as consensus, which your brain trusts more than evidence. The quiet move here is noticing when you're about to pass something along, asking yourself whether you'd say this directly to the person or whether it only feels safe because they're not in the room. That friction is usually where the contagion lives, and learning to feel it before you speak is where the power actually rests. Preference falsification. You're at a dinner table and someone makes a joke that lands a little wrong. Not offensive exactly, just dated. Everyone laughs anyway, and you laugh too. Even though you didn't find it funny, nobody's forcing you. But there's a rhythm, a social current, and paddling against it feels like more effort than it's worth. That moment is preference falsification in its smallest, most honest form. When you perform agreement because the cost of speaking your actual thought feels higher than the cost of staying quiet. The sneaky part is that this isn't lying in the traditional sense. You're not saying something you believe to be false. You're just not saying the thing you believe to be true. And it spreads fast. When one person laughs at the dated joke, the next person feels safer laughing. Pretty soon, the whole room is laughing, and the actual sentiment, "This joke is kind of stale," disappears into fog. Nobody will remember they thought it was weak. They'll remember the collective laughter instead, and that memory becomes the new truth. This scales dangerously beyond the dinner table. Political opinions, workplace cultures, friend groups, entire movements run on preference falsification underneath. You stop saying what you actually think because you believe you're outnumbered. So you perform agreement, which makes others believe they're outnumbered too, which makes them perform agreement, and suddenly the group has a consensus that nobody actually holds in private. The terrifying part is that you can't usually see your own preference falsification while it's happening. It feels like honest assent, not performance. Your brain rewrites the memory so the laugh feels genuine in hindsight. So the next time you're nodding along to something and feel a small quiet tug, a hesitation, a gap between your mouth and your gut, pause and notice it. That tug is your preference falsification alarm. It's telling you that you're performing, not present. Doesn't mean you have to speak up every time, but noticing the gap is the only way to know when silence is a choice and when it's become a habit. Private opinion versus public script. You've probably noticed it. Someone says one thing at the dinner table and something entirely different when you catch them alone later. Not a lie exactly, but a shift so clean, it's like watching a person step into a different room. This gap between what we actually think and what we perform grows wider the more we care about fitting in. Your coworker might think the meeting was pointless, but in the moment, she's nodding and taking notes like it's gospel. Your friend agrees with the group's plan, then texts you an hour later, admitting she hates it. Both versions are real. Neither one is the true opinion. They're both genuine reactions to different social pressures. When you're in a group, especially one where status or belonging matters, your brain runs a different calculation. It weighs fitting in against being honest, and fitting in usually wins because rejection still triggers the same ancient survival alarm it did thousands of years ago. The private opinion is what you think when the social cost is low. The public script is what you perform when the cost of standing out feels too high. And here's where it gets sticky. The more someone performs a script, the more they can start to believe it themselves. Repetition rewires belief. That coworker might actually start convincing herself the meeting was brilliant just because she acted like it was. The gap between private and public doesn't make people dishonest. It makes them human and under pressure. What's worth watching is how long the script runs. Eventually, it starts to colonize the real opinion underneath. Next time you're in a group and notice someone being unusually enthusiastic or agreeable, try a quieter move, give them a solo moment to breathe, or ask for their real thought afterward in a way that costs them nothing to be honest. You might be surprised how much permission they're quietly asking for, and how quickly the real person comes back when they feel safe to show up. The friendliness ceiling. You've probably noticed it. Someone is warm and generous to you for months, even years, and then something shifts. Not dramatically, no explosion, but the ease drains out. They're still nice, technically, but the door has closed. What happened? You didn't hurt them. You didn't betray their trust. You simply asked for something slightly deeper than the script allowed. The friendliness ceiling is that invisible line where casual kindness stops and actual vulnerability begins. And most people have no idea theirs is there until you accidentally press against it. Friendliness is often a container, not a connection. What people offer when they want warmth without risk. A coworker can be genuinely pleasant to you every single day, remember your coffee order, laugh at your jokes, and still have zero intention of ever really knowing you. They're not being fake. They're being human in a particular way. friendly, at arm's length. The moment you shift from being someone they're nice to into someone who might actually matter to them, the entire math changes. Now you're not just a smooth social interaction. You're a potential obligation, a witness, a claim on their attention and energy. So they unconsciously pull back, often without even noticing they're doing it. Some people have very high ceilings, the type who slip into real friendship with ease and don't flinch when things get messy. Others have ceilings so low they struggle to let anyone close, no matter how patient you are. Most of us live somewhere in the middle, generous with surface warmth, but carefully rationing the deeper, riskier stuff. And here's what matters. It almost never has anything to do with you as a person. It's about their bandwidth, their fear of disappointing people, their old patterns of what closeness actually costs them. The next time someone suddenly seems less available or the warmth goes formal, you don't need to panic or blame yourself. You probably just hit their ceiling. That's not rejection, that's just the edge of what they can offer right now. Bystander, diffusion of warmth. You've probably felt it at a party. Someone walks in and immediately splits their attention between 3 conversations, and suddenly nobody feels like they're getting the real version of them. That fractured presence changes how everyone relates back. It's not that they stopped caring, it's that their warmth got thinned across too many places at once, and everyone got a smaller piece. When you're genuinely focused on one person, they feel chosen. Your attention becomes a small light, but multiply that beam across a group, and something invisible happens. The warmth spreads so thin that nobody feels lit up anymore. You've seen this in families. A parent trying to referee 2 kids' needs at once, or a partner showing up emotionally while managing work anxiety. The intention is still there, but the felt presence gets diluted. Here's where it gets sticky. People don't usually blame the diffusion. They blame the person. They think, they don't care as much as I thought, when really, attention itself has limits. You can't give 100% of yourself to 6 people. The math just doesn't work. What makes this dangerous is that it's invisible to the distributor. You feel like you're doing your best, spreading goodwill, being open, but your friends, your partner, or your team members are all experiencing a thinner version of you than they expected. The micro signals of real attention, the unbroken eye contact, the response without delay, the way you lean in, those disappear when bandwidth splits. The fix isn't guilt, it's honest intervals. Give someone 3 minutes of actual presence instead of 30 minutes of half presence. Let them feel like they got the real you, even if briefly. That small intensity of focus rebuilds what diffusion tears apart. The person who walks in and gives 5 minutes of full warmth to each person ends up feeling more present than the one trying to be everywhere at once. Everyone remembers the real version of you. De-individuation in groups. You know that feeling when you're in a crowd and suddenly you do something you'd never do alone? Maybe you yell louder at a concert, or join in when a group laughs at someone, or feel braver in a protest than you ever thought you were. That's not you becoming more authentic. That's you becoming less visible to yourself. De-individuation is what happens when the group swallows your sense of individual accountability, and the mechanism is almost biological. Anonymity, noise, the presence of others, even dim lighting. All of these reduce what psychologists call self-awareness, the part of you that normally says, "This is me, and I will answer for this." When you're surrounded, your actions blur into a collective, and that blur is intoxicating because it feels like freedom. You're not personally responsible if everyone's doing it, right? Wrong. But that's the seductive whisper your brain tells you in a crowd. Strangers around you aren't holding you accountable because you're not visibly you anymore. You're a faceless unit in something larger. This is why riots escalate faster than rational conversation ever could. It's why office groups can gang up on one person in ways that would make any individual participant cringe when they're alone later. The quiet danger is that de-individuation doesn't require evil intent. Good people vanish into crowds all the time. A kind person stops intervening. A thoughtful person stops thinking. You don't need malice to disappear inside a group. You just need the right conditions. Cover, noise, numbers. The fix isn't to avoid groups, though that's tempting. It's to stay anchored to yourself inside them. Notice when you're starting to feel that dissolution, that loss of I in the we. Keep your name active in your own mind, and if you catch yourself in a moment where the crowd is pulling you towards something you wouldn't defend one-on-one, that friction you feel, that's not weakness or overthinking. That's the last rope between you and someone you won't recognize later. Role identity switching. Your mom walks into the break room at work and suddenly you don't recognize your own voice. It's higher, softer, more careful. Your friends at the table tilt their heads. Who is this person? And the wild part is, you didn't decide to perform. It just happened. That's role identity switching, and it's not a flaw in your character. It's how humans are wired to survive in different tribes. We're not one person, we're a cast of characters, and we swap scripts the moment the audience changes. At home with your parents, you revert to someone younger, more deferential, shaped by old family hierarchies that still live in your nervous system. At work, you're competent and boundaried. With your kids, you're patient, maybe. With your closest friend, you're raw and unfiltered. None of these versions is fake, exactly. They're all you, just optimized for different social contexts. The problem arrives when you get confused about which version is the real you, or when someone expects the intimate version to show up in a public room and doesn't understand why you can't. Your partner goes quiet because you laughed differently with your coworker, a laugh they've never heard. Your parent feels hurt because you're stiff and professional when they show up, like you're checking a box instead of seeing them. They think you've changed. You have, but only for that moment. Here's the trap. The more consciously you perform a role, the easier it gets, and eventually, it can feel truer than your actual preferences. A lawyer who performs ruthless negotiator for 10 years might wake up one day and realize they've lost the gentler version entirely. A customer service rep trained to smile through rage starts doing it at home without thinking. What matters is paying attention to which roles you're slipping into without noticing. Catch yourself mid-script. It's not about being more authentic everywhere. That would actually make you unsuited for reality, but about knowing when you're shifting so you can choose to do it on purpose instead of waking up a stranger to yourself. Perceived competence threat. You walk into a meeting and mention something you're genuinely good at. Maybe you fixed a bug everyone else missed, or you know the new regulation inside out. And suddenly, the air shifts. Someone who was warm 5 minutes ago becomes sharp, dismissive, almost looking for holes in what you said. It's not that you did anything wrong. It's that you accidentally reminded them they're not the expert in the room, and people don't handle that gracefully. What you've triggered is a competence threat, and it rewires how someone treats you in real time. When people feel their expertise or status slipping, they don't usually admit it. They get competitive, defensive, or they start undercutting you. A colleague who seemed supportive suddenly nitpicks your work. A friend stops returning texts the way they used to. A manager who praised you last month now questions your methods. None of this is logical. You didn't actually diminish them, but their brain registered a threat to how they see themselves, and threat mode changes everything. The invisible part is that the person experiencing it rarely knows that's what's happening. They might tell themselves you're arrogant, or that your work isn't as solid as you think, or that they're just being more realistic. But underneath is a simple, primal anxiety. If you're better at this thing, what does that say about me? It's a question their ego can't afford to answer, honestly. People protect their sense of competence harder than they protect almost anything else. It's wrapped up in identity, survival instinct, years of proof about whether they're good enough. So, when you accidentally outshine someone, especially in front of an audience, you're not just winning an exchange, you're touching something tender and exposed. The move isn't to hide your competence, but to make it safe for others to sit with theirs. Acknowledge what they know. Ask for their input on something real. Show them that your skills don't erase theirs, that the room is big enough for both kinds of expertise. That small permission often thaws the person right back. Envy disguised as concern. Your friend gets the promotion you wanted, and suddenly their voice shifts into that careful tone. They're telling you how much the new job will stress them out, how the money doesn't really matter, how they're worried they won't be good enough. It sounds like vulnerability. It sounds like they need your reassurance. But listen closer. What they're actually doing is rehearsing their right to have what you don't. They're not asking for comfort. They're asking for permission. Envy hides best in the costume of concern, because concern is something we can't argue with. Who wants to be the person who dismisses someone's worries? So the jealous person gets to voice their resentment in a shape that forces you to comfort them, validate them, prove you're not bitter. Meanwhile, you're left wondering why celebrating someone you love feels so much like being scolded. The real tell is in which direction the worry points. Real concern doesn't require constant reassurance from the person who wanted the thing too. Real concern is about them. Envy dressed up as concern circles back to you, to your reaction, your absolution, your proof that you're fine with their win. Listen to the phrasing, "I hope I don't mess this up," lives in a different room than, "I know you're probably disappointed, but I hope I don't mess this up." One is worry about the future. The other is guilt, dressed as worry, and it's asking you to carry something that isn't yours. Here's what makes it so sticky. People don't usually lie about envy on purpose. They feel the concern and the envy both, tangled together like roots, and they genuinely can't separate them. Their body doesn't know the difference, but you can. When someone's good news comes wrapped in a nervous apology directed at you, when their worry has your name in it, you don't have to soothe what isn't your wound. You can notice it, stay warm, and simply not play the role they've cast you in. That small refusal to apologize for their win is how you keep the friendship honest and real. Benign envy versus malicious envy. Your colleague gets promoted, and you feel a twist in your chest. The question that follows, within milliseconds, before you even notice it, determines what happens next. Do you think, "I want that," or do you think, "I want them to not have that"? That split is the difference between the kind of envy that propels you forward and the kind that eats you alive. Benign envy is fuel, malicious envy is poison, and nobody teaches you how to tell them apart in real time. Benign envy says, "They have something I value, so their success reminds me what's possible." It stings a little, that part is honest, but the sting points upward. You feel motivated. You watch how they did it. You think about what you'd need to do differently. The relationship doesn't shatter. You might even root for them eventually, because their win doesn't require your loss. Malicious envy is the inverted mirror. Their success feels like your proof of failure. You don't want the thing they have as much as you want the weight of it lifted from them, so you start noticing what they did wrong. You tell the story of how they got lucky, or how they stepped on people, or how it won't last. You become a little crueler in how you speak about them, not because you're a cruel person, but because diminishing them feels like it restores balance. Here's what makes this dangerous. Malicious envy masks itself as justice. You're not bitter, you're realistic. You're not jealous, you're perceptive. And while you're busy building that story, the person you're envying barely notices. But you notice. Your body notices. Chronic low-grade malice changes your baseline, your breathing, your sleep, how you show up in other relationships. The move, if you catch yourself sliding into malicious territory, is to get honest about what you actually want, not what they have. What would make you feel like you matter? Sometimes the answer is uncomfortable, but it's the only way back. The tall poppy reflex. Your friend lands the promotion she spent 2 years chasing, and when you text congratulations, her response comes back small, almost embarrassed. A week later, she's making jokes about her cramped office, how the pay raise isn't as big as people think, how she's stressed now. She's pulling herself back down to a safer height. What you are watching is the tall poppy reflex, and it runs deeper in human groups than most of us realize. The image comes from Australian folklore. In a field of poppies, the tallest one gets cut down first. Groups have always been nervous around the person who stands out, not just from envy, though that plays a role, but because visibility feels dangerous. If you are noticeably better, smarter, richer, or more successful than the cluster around you, you become the target, and targets get noticed by predators, critics, and people with their own pain looking for someone to pull down. So tall poppies bend. They hide their wins, soften their language, volunteer for smaller roles, or suddenly start complaining about how hard things are. It's a survival move dressed up as modesty, and you do it so smoothly, you stop noticing you are doing it. Someone asks how your project went, and before your mouth finishes, saying, "Great," your brain is already reaching for a flaw to mention. You land a big client and immediately text about how stressful it is. You get asked to lead the team, and you joke about being in over your head. The reflex often works. The group feels less threatened. You get less backlash. The tension lowers, but the cost is slow and real. You teach people not to trust your success. You teach yourself to shrink. The move is not to broadcast everything or become obnoxious about your wins. It is to notice when you are bending yourself down and ask if the group you are in is actually safe enough to stand at full height, or if it is time to find one that is. Success punished by peers. You get promoted, and suddenly, your oldest friend stops texting. You land a deal, and your family finds reasons to make you feel small for it. You lose weight, and the group chat goes quieter. Nothing bad happened to them, but something in how they relate to you shifted, and it feels like punishment for winning. This isn't paranoia, it's real, and it's because you've just changed the invisible bargain you all made without ever speaking it aloud. Groups survive on equilibrium, not fairness exactly, but balance. If you're the funny one, and I'm the smart one, and she's the steady one, we all know where we stand. We know who to ask, who to lean on, what role each person plays. It's comfortable, it's predictable. Then you succeed at something meaningful, and the map shifts without warning. You're no longer just the person they knew, you're the person who did the thing. And if you did it, the unspoken question becomes, why can't they? The punishment isn't always mean. Sometimes it's withdrawal. Sometimes casual cutting comments dressed as jokes. Sometimes they root for you out loud but keep distance now, as if success makes them nervous. What matters most? They're often not even aware they're doing it. It's not a conscious choice to punish you. It's a nervous system adjustment. You've moved in the hierarchy, and the group is recalibrating who you are in relation to them. The people closest to you have the most invested in you, staying the same, not out of malice usually, but because your stability is part of their stability. Your success forces them to ask themselves questions they may not want to answer, so they pull back, or test you, or find small ways to remind you of who you used to be. Knowing this doesn't make it hurt less, but it does let you stop blaming yourself for outgrowing the space you were given, and it might help you understand why some friendships don't survive the climb. Zero-sum framing of your win. You get the promotion, and suddenly your best friend stops texting back. You mention the new salary over dinner, and your partner goes quiet. Nothing you said was cruel or boastful. You were just sharing good news. Yet somehow, the room temperature dropped. What happened is simple and brutal. When you won, your brain went first to the facts. Their brain went to scarcity. In a zero-sum frame, your gain is their loss. Even if mathematically that makes no sense at all. There is only so much success in the world. Their buried intuition screams, and if you took some, less is left for me. This isn't about envy alone. It is about how threat works in the social hierarchy. When someone close to you moves up, it rewires the entire map of where you stand. Suddenly, you are lower by comparison, even if your life hasn't changed 1 inch. The brain doesn't measure wealth, status, or love in absolute terms. It measures in relative terms, against the people around you. A win for you is proof the ladder has shifted, and they are somewhere below where they thought they were. Here is what makes this stick. The person who loses ground often feels it in their body before they can name it. A tightness, a coldness, a small voice asking, "When will it be my turn?" That feeling is so real, so physical, that they believe it is truth. So they pull back. They turn small. They wait for something to fail, because failure restores the balance. The trap deepens when you try to reassure them with logic. This is good for both of us, or there is enough for everyone. Logic bounces off a threat response. What they actually need is not argument, but acknowledgement. If you want to keep people close after you win, do not assume they are happy for you. Assume they are recalibrating. Give them language. Say it plainly. This doesn't change what I think about you or what you are building. The specificity matters more than the niceness. You are not asking for applause. You are giving them permission to stay and breathe. Relative deprivation resentment. You make $70,000 a year. Your neighbor makes $75,000. On paper, you are fine. You have a roof, food, health insurance, everything your younger self would have called lucky. But now there is a small poison in your chest when you see their car, their vacation photos, the easy way they talk about money. It is not about what you lack in absolute terms. It is about what you lack relative to someone you use the same measuring stick against. That gap, that's where resentment lives. Relative deprivation is the gap between what you think you deserve and what you actually have, measured against people you consider your peers. And the worst part? Your brain will find peers everywhere, not just your neighbor, the people on your college class Facebook page, the person 3 pay grades above you, the sibling who married richer, the friend who seems to be thriving while you are still figuring it out. You compare up, rarely down, and each comparison feels like evidence that you are falling behind. This is why someone making decent money can feel poor if everyone around them is wealthier. This is why a promotion that should feel like a win can feel hollow if a colleague got promoted faster. The actual circumstances do not change. Only your reference group does. And here is what makes this dangerous. Relative deprivation is one of the most reliable predictors of anger. of loyalty, collapse, of sudden betrayal. A person will turn on a group, a company, a friend, not because they were never treated well, but because they suddenly noticed they were treated less well than they felt entitled to expect. The antidote is not gratitude alone, though that helps. It is noticing when you have shifted your measuring stick without permission. When did you start comparing yourself to the people with more instead of the billions with less? That small awareness, catching the moment you chose your reference group, is often enough to put the resentment back on pause. Scarcity mindset narrowing. Watch what happens to someone when they run low on something they think they need. Time, money, attention, love. Their whole lens narrows. They stop seeing options. They become more reactive, less creative, willing to make trades they'd never make when the well felt full. This isn't weakness or stupidity. This is your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Focus hard when resources feel tight, but that same survival mechanism that keeps you laser focused also makes you forget how to see the room. The trap is that scarcity mindset is contagious and self-reinforcing. When you feel squeezed for something, you make faster, tighter decisions, and those decisions often create the very squeeze you were afraid of. You spend money you don't have to feel secure. You cling harder to a relationship because you're afraid of losing it, which pushes the other person away. You say yes to a job that doesn't fit because you're convinced it's your last chance. Then you're trapped. Your scarcity brain wasn't protecting you. It was narrowing the escape routes. Here's where it gets strange. Someone can have plenty on paper and still live in scarcity mindset. They grew up without enough, or they watched someone suffer, and that storyline plays on repeat. They hoard. They worry before anything is actually threatened. They interpret neutral events as threats. Meanwhile, someone with real constraints sometimes stays looser, more generous, more creative, because they never internalize the panic. The shift starts small. When you feel that tightness, that everything depends on this one thing, pause and ask what you can't see right now because you're tunnel-visioned. What options are off your radar? What relationships are you squeezing because you're afraid? What moves are you avoiding because scarcity told you they're too risky? Most of the time, the scarcity was real only in that first moment. Everything after was your mind spinning worse versions of the story. Notice that difference, and some of the grip loosens. Schadenfreude as status repair. You watch someone you secretly envy stumble. A promotion falls through. A relationship cracks. A public moment goes sideways. And something warm floods through you before guilt swallows it. That warmth has a name and a reason. And it is not quite as simple as just being mean. Schadenfreude, the pleasure taken in someone else's misfortune, gets painted as a moral failing, but beneath it sits something far more structural, a quick, unconscious bid to level the social playing field. When someone is ahead of you in status, they represent a small wound to your place in the social order. Their failure does not change your actual rank, but it does something quieter and more powerful. It makes you feel less small. By comparison, the hierarchy shuffles, at least in your mind, and suddenly, you are not as far behind. This is not complicated envy. It is status repair through sympathy withdrawal. The tricky part is that we rarely admit this to ourselves. You might tell yourself you are glad they are getting comeuppance for being arrogant or dishonest, and maybe that is partly true, but the speed with which you feel pleasure, the lightning-quick hit before rationalization kicks in, that is pure status recalibration. It happens even with people you do not directly compete with, people who have nothing to do with you except existing at a higher rung. The moment you catch yourself feeling it, you are not morally corrupt. You are just human, and human hierarchies are sensitive instruments tuned to every shift. The move is not to shame yourself into feeling nothing. It is to notice where the pleasure came from and ask if that person's failure actually changed anything real about your life. Often, it has not. The relief you felt was always temporary, a chemical flicker that leaves you exactly where you started. Older and a little smaller. That awareness, not judgment, just clarity, is what actually moves you past it. Because once you see the machinery loses its grip. Downward comparison relief. You're scrolling through photos of someone's vacation at midnight, and something inside you softens. Not because the photos are beautiful, but because you notice their lighting is bad, or their kids are arguing in one shot, or they're wearing the same wrinkled shirt twice. Relief floods in. A tiny, almost shameful relief. What just happened is called downward comparison, and it's one of the most honest, unself-conscious ways we repair our self-image when life feels small. Here's the machinery. When you're feeling behind, inferior, or like you're failing at something that matters, your brain doesn't sit with the feeling. It hunts for someone else in a worse position. Not to be cruel, though sometimes it is, but to restore balance. That person's messy divorce, their struggle with their weight, their dead-end job, their visible anxiety in the family photo. Suddenly, your own situation feels manageable. The gap between where you are and where you want to be shrinks, not because anything changed about you, but because you've mentally relocated the finish line. The trap is that downward comparison is genuinely soothing in the moment, which trains you to use it more. You see a friend's relationship implode and feel less terrified about your own. You hear about someone's health crisis and feel grateful yours isn't worse. None of this is malicious. Your nervous system is simply trying to keep you steady, but the cost is real. You stop working to improve your actual life because the chemical reward of comparison is so immediate and clean. The stickier version is recognizing when you're reaching for this relief, not to shame yourself, but to notice what you're actually afraid of underneath. That relief is a signpost pointing at a part of you that feels unseen or behind. Instead of scrolling for someone worse off, sit with what the fear is actually about. That's where the real work lives. Not in convincing yourself you're better than someone else, but in deciding what you actually want to become. Social comparison whiplash. You're sitting at brunch and your friend casually mentions she just got promoted, and something shifts in your chest. Not quite envy, not quite shame, but a hot mix of both that makes you recalibrate everything you thought about yourself 3 seconds earlier. You walked in feeling fine. You walked out feeling behind. Nothing about your actual life changed, but the mirror just moved, and suddenly you're measuring yourself against a new standard. That's social comparison whiplash, and it's the reason people can feel confident one moment and crush the next, depending entirely on who they're standing next to. Your brain doesn't measure you against an absolute. It measures you against the closest available reference point. So when you're the strongest person in the gym, you feel strong. When a bodybuilder walks in, you feel weak. Same body, same ability, completely different emotional reality. And because we're drowning in other people's curated highlights now, Instagram, LinkedIn, group chats full of wins, you're essentially having your comparison whiplash triggered dozens of times a day, often by people you don't even know, in rooms you're not physically in. Here's what makes it really stick. That hot feeling isn't just about them being ahead of you. It's about you suddenly being unsure where you stand in the hierarchy. And humans are fundamentally obsessed with hierarchy. Our nervous system evolved to track our social rank because rank meant access to resources and survival itself. So, when someone nearby succeeds, your brain reads it as a threat to your status, even when logically, you know their win isn't your loss. The next time you feel that sudden deflation after hearing someone else's good news, try pausing and naming what's actually happening. You're not responding to their reality. You're responding to a shift in your reference point, a recalibration that has almost nothing to do with facts and everything to do with where you sit in the moment. That awareness won't make the feeling disappear. It's wired too deep into your survival brain, but it'll help you stop absorbing it as truth about your own worth, which is the real move that matters. Self-concept, defense reflex. Someone you know does something small and wrong, forgets a promise, snaps at you over nothing, backs out last minute. And then, instead of saying sorry, they do something strange. They explain why it wasn't actually wrong. They tell you why you're being unfair for pointing it out. They rewrite the whole thing, so they come out the good guy. That moment right there is the self-concept defense reflex firing. Your brain does not care about the facts as much as it cares about keeping your self-image intact. It is a reflex, like flinching. You do not decide to do it. The moment someone implies you are not who you think you are, something automatic flips. If you see yourself as kind and someone suggests you were unkind, your mind gets loud trying to prove them wrong or prove that you had a good reason. If you see yourself as competent and you make a mistake in front of others, watch how fast you blame the circumstances, the tools, the person who handed you the wrong thing. Not because you are lying exactly, because admitting the mistake would mean rewriting your internal story. That is expensive. That feels dangerous. Here is what catches most people. The ones who defend their self-image hardest are often the ones whose sense of self is most fragile. Someone rock solid in who they are can laugh at their mistakes. Someone uncertain has to protect the image because the image is all they have. You see this in relationships constantly. One partner mentions something the other did did, and instead of hearing feedback, the defended partner hears a verdict on their worth. So they counterattack or minimize or explain away. The conversation was never about the thing. It was always about survival of the self-concept. Watch yourself next time you feel that hot defensive surge coming up. You do not have to fight it. Just notice it is there. That noticing alone creates a tiny space where you can choose something different. Threat to the narrative self. You tell yourself you're the kind of person who doesn't get angry, calm, measured. Then someone says one small thing, and you explode in a way that terrifies even you. In that moment, something more than emotions is on fire. Your story about who you are just got contradicted, and your brain treats that like a 5-alarm emergency. This is the narrative self, and it runs almost everything about how you present to the world. Your narrative self is the coherent identity you've stitched together over years. Your values, your quirks, the character you've decided you are. It's not a lie, exactly. It's more like a working autobiography you keep in your chest and defend like a border guard. The problem is that when reality threatens that narrative, when you act out of character, when someone points out a contradiction, when you fail at something you've built your identity around, your nervous system doesn't just feel embarrassed, it feels erased. Watch how people react when you challenge their core narrative. A person who sees themselves as generous gets weird if you suggest they're selfish, even in one instance. Someone who's built their life around being strong crumbles when they need help. A parent who identifies as always patient loses it harder when they yell at their kid than the yelling itself warrants. The violence comes from the gap between the story and the behavior. And here's what changes people around you. Threat to the narrative self makes people either defend it harder or abandon you to protect it. They'll minimize, rewrite, blame shift, or simply disappear from your life, rather than integrate that contradiction into their sense of self. It's not weakness or meanness, it's survival. The narrative self feels like the only solid ground they have. The quieter move is to notice when someone gets disproportionately defensive about something small. That reaction isn't about the thing, it's about a story you've touched without knowing it. And sometimes, understanding that is the difference between a conflict that spirals and one that doesn't. Identity protection under scrutiny. Someone you trust asks you a question that lands sideways, not hostile, just curious. Why did you actually apply for that job? Or, do you really believe that, or are you just saying it? In that split second, you feel something tighten. The question isn't about the job or the belief. It's pointed at you, at who you've decided you are, and your first instinct is to defend, to explain, to prove them wrong. That instinct is identity protection in real time, and it's running a script so old you barely notice it anymore. We don't just have beliefs and preferences the way we have clothes we can swap out. We weave them into a story about who we are, and once they're woven in, they stop being separate ideas we can examine calmly. They become us. So, when someone questions your choice, your taste, your stand on something, you experience it as a threat to yourself, not as a new perspective to consider. And the tighter the threat feels, the more aggressively you'll defend it. You'll argue harder, dismiss faster, dig in deeper, all while telling yourself you're just being logical. What's really happening is you're protecting the border of your identity, keeping out anything that might crack the picture you've built. The subtle part is that this happens even when you're wrong, even when you know, somewhere quiet inside, that you've maybe made a mistake or that someone else has a point. But admitting it feels like admitting you were a different person than who you thought you were, and that's scarier than staying stuck. So, you double down instead. The next time someone questions something about you, your choice, your habit, your view, notice where the heat comes from. Is it the idea itself, or is it the threat to the version of yourself that made that choice? That tiny distinction changes everything about how you respond and whether you learn or just perform. Reactance to implied control. You suggest a restaurant and your partner suddenly doesn't want to go, even though they were hungry 5 minutes ago. You mention your friend really needs to cut back on coffee, and the next week they're ordering double shots, like a personal mission. Nothing about the place or the coffee changed. What shifted is they felt steered, and now they're steering back. That's reactance. And it runs deeper than stubbornness. Your nervous system reads implied control as a threat to your freedom, and it fires back before your conscious mind even finishes the sentence. The pushback isn't logical, it's primal. When you sense someone trying to narrow your choices, even gently, even for your own good, a part of you rebels. It's why nagging backfires so hard, why rules make forbidden things gleam, why the harder someone sells you on something, the more suspicious you become. The thing that makes reactance so sticky is that it doesn't care about the actual quality of the suggestion. A genuinely brilliant idea becomes poison the moment it feels imposed. A person can know, intellectually, that the advice is sound and still refuse it with surprising ferocity, all because someone else framed it as what they should do. You've probably done it yourself, without noticing. Rejected something good simply because someone else decided for you. At work, this is why "you need to" triggers resistance, while "here's what I'm noticing" opens a door. In relationships, it's why ultimatums rarely work, but options do. The person on the receiving end of control, even a whisper of it, becomes focused on proving they can't be controlled, and that focus eclipses everything else. The quietest reframe is to let people choose, not by backing off entirely, but by handing them the decision back. What would work for you, instead of "you should"? That small shift stops the wall from building. You keep your input, they keep their autonomy, and suddenly the good idea has a chance to land because nobody's too busy defending their freedom to hear it. Correction as dominance display. You say something small in a group, a date, a name, a price, and someone jumps in with the fix before you've even finished your sentence. Not to help you, not because they're excited, because correcting you, in front of witnesses, moves them up the invisible ladder. It's a subtle knife, and it works because it looks innocent. They're just being accurate. But notice what happens to the room. Everyone hears it, everyone watches you absorb it, and everyone files away the unspoken message. This person catches mistakes. This person is sharper. This person is in charge of truth here. The corrector gets a small hit of status. You get a small drop. It's a transaction most people don't even notice they're making. The trap is that smart people do this, most often, not out of rudeness, but out of habit. Their brains move fast. They spot the gap between what's said and what's accurate. And before their social filter catches up, they've already spoken. But the effect is the same. They've made you smaller. And if they do it repeatedly, even kindly, the group starts to see you as the person who gets corrected, not the person who corrects. Now here's what matters. Your brain registers this as threat, not because you're insecure, but because status in a group is real. It affects whether people listen to you, whether they include you, whether they trust your judgment. So when you're tempted to correct someone, pause for one breath. Ask yourself if the information needs fixing right now, or if you're fixing it because it feels good to be the one who knows. If it's the second answer, let it go. If you really need to say it, do it quietly, one-on-one, after the group has moved on. That's the move that keeps both of you safe. It's also how you stop being the person everyone learned to tune out, and it's how you become someone whose corrections actually land, because they're rare enough to matter. Unsolicited advice as insult. Your coworker tells you about a conflict with their boss. You listen, nod, and then immediately say, "Here's what you should do." 3 seconds of silence. Their face goes flat. Suddenly they're defending themselves, not opening up. And you have no idea why you just became the enemy. What happened is this: unsolicited advice, no matter how good, lands as a statement that says, "I think you're broken, and I have the cure. I think you can't figure this out without me." When someone shares something difficult without asking for solutions, they are often asking for something else entirely. Recognition, validation, a sense that they're not alone in struggling. Advice, even brilliant advice, skips right over that. It says, "Your problem is simple enough that I can solve it in one sentence, and therefore, your distress is something I don't have to sit with." People can taste that. They feel unseen, not helped. And here's where it gets thornier. You probably offered the advice because you care. You wanted to help. But caring and respecting someone's autonomy are not the same thing. Respecting someone means noticing when they haven't asked you to fix anything and just staying present instead. That takes more courage than offering a solution, because you have to sit with someone's pain without trying to make it evaporate. The instinct to solve is actually a way of protecting yourself from discomfort. If you fix it, you don't have to feel helpless. But the other person knows that. They can feel when you're solving for them versus solving for your own anxiety. Next time someone shares something heavy without asking, try this. Ask once if they want ideas. That's it. One question. If they say no, let it go. If they say yes, you can offer. The shift is small, but it changes everything. Suddenly, you're a partner in their thinking, not the person who thinks they know better. That's the difference between advice and insult. Help that humiliates. You show up early to help a friend move, muscles ready, enthusiasm high, genuinely trying to lighten their load. But somewhere between the first and third box, you notice them getting quieter, their jaw tighter, their energy flattening into something that looks like withdrawal. By the time you leave, the thank you lands thin and uncertain, and weeks later, they don't ask for your help again, even when you're certain they need it. What went wrong? Nothing obvious on the surface. You were useful, you showed up, you were kind, but you made them small, and that burns deeper than any physical weight. When help arrives loudly, with an audience or comparison built into it, something shifts in the recipient's mind. They stop feeling supported and start feeling exposed, like their need just became public property, like they couldn't manage alone, and now the whole story is written and witnessed. Meanwhile, you feel good about yourself, which is exactly the trap. You did the hard thing. You're the hero of this narrative, but they're the one left standing in the wreckage of feeling like they failed first and you rescued them second. This is why some people refuse help even when refusing costs them real money or time or suffering. It's not stubbornness, it's self-protection. Accepting help from the wrong angle can wound worse than struggling alone, because struggle stays private, stays theirs. Help done wrong turns you into the problem they couldn't solve. The shift happens when help becomes nearly invisible, a text with a solution, instead of showing up unannounced. Money moved quietly, with no speech attached, arriving only when asked rather than when you think they need it. The best help doesn't announce itself or create some redemption story where you're the strong one and they're the broken one you fixed. It just removes friction and lets them keep their dignity intact, which turns out to be the thing they actually needed most all along. Next time you see someone struggling, try asking what they genuinely want: the practical help or just your quiet presence. That choice matters more than the effort itself, and it will reshape how they see you afterward, and far more importantly, how they see themselves when you're gone. The favor asymmetry problem. You lend a friend $200, and suddenly you're hyper-aware of every text they miss, every birthday they forget, every time they're too busy to grab coffee. They borrowed your car once, just once, and 2 years later, they mention it like you saved their life. This is not about the money or the car. It is about the math your brain does differently depending on whose side of the favor you're on. When you give, your brain inflates the value. When you receive, your brain shrinks it. Neither of you is lying. You both genuinely believe your accounting is accurate. The person who lent you the money remembers it as sacrifice. You remember it as help. Kind, sure, but not world-ending. The gap between those two numbers is where friendships quietly fracture. What makes this harder is that nobody thinks they're doing it. You assume you're being fair because you feel the weight of what you gave. They assume they're being fair because they feel the weight of what they owed. You think your generosity was generous. They think it was just decent. And when the asymmetry gets too big, when one person believes they've been the consistent giver, something flips. Suddenly, they're keeping score without meaning to. They notice when you don't reciprocate in kind, not in actual value, but in the value they assigned. Resentment doesn't come from one broken promise. It comes from this invisible ledger that never matches. The trickiest part, the person who feels they've given more is often right about the material facts, but often wrong about what those facts mean. Your friend might actually have asked for more help, but they might also have needed less and felt smaller because of it. Next time you sense someone pulling back, before you assume they're ungrateful, ask yourself what they thought they owed and what you thought you gave. The gap between those two numbers is almost always where the story goes sideways. Reciprocity, debt, discomfort. Someone does you a favor. Small, unsolicited, kind. They help you move. They pick you up from the airport. They introduce you to a person who changes your career. And suddenly, you feel it. That tightness in your chest. That faint urgency to repay, to balance the scales before they go unspoken and poison the relationship. That feeling is reciprocity debt, and it's one of the most misunderstood forces in how people behave around you. Here's what actually happens. Your brain registers an imbalance. Not just socially, neurologically. Someone gave energy. You owe energy back. The debt is not a choice. It's automatic. And that discomfort you feel, it's not gratitude. It's obligation, wearing a friendly mask. Most people try to pay it back fast, quickly, almost frantically, because sitting in debt feels unsafe. You buy them dinner. You offer a favor before they ask. You recommend them for something. You're not being generous. You're trying to make the scales level again so you can breathe. But here's where it gets sticky. Some people give knowing full well you'll feel this. They create the debt intentionally. It's not cynical. It's just how influence works. A mentor helps you. Now you owe them loyalty. A boss throws you a bone. Now you're more likely to work the weekend. A friend shows up in a crisis. Now you're locked in. The person who understands reciprocity debt is someone who can move you without you fully realizing you've been moved. And the person who gets trapped by it is someone who spends their life trying to pay back debts they never actually agreed to. The move is this. Start noticing when someone does something nice and then watches your face. That pause, that expectation, that's them registering the debt on their end. You don't have to repay it the way they hope. Sometimes, the bravest thing is to simply receive without performing gratitude in real time. Let the discomfort sit. It usually fades faster than you think. Ben Franklin effect reversed. You do someone a favor, a real one, the kind that costs you time or energy, and afterward, you feel closer to them. That is the Ben Franklin effect, and it works like clockwork, but flip it around and something darker happens. When someone does a major favor for you, when they bail you out or rescue you from a mess, the relationship often gets colder, not warmer, and most people never see it coming. The dynamic shifts because now there's an imbalance in the emotional ledger. They have given you something significant. You are on the receiving end. Pride gets tangled up in gratitude, and pride usually wins. Part of you feels indebted, which sounds noble, until you realize indebtedness feels like weakness to the ego. You start noticing things you wouldn't have noticed before. Maybe they mention the favor casually, or you sense they expect something back, or their tone seems slightly condescending. None of it might be real. Your mind is building a story to protect you from the discomfort of being helped. So you distance yourself, pull back, or turn slightly critical. They did this huge thing, and now suddenly, they are the annoying one, the inconvenient one. You have rewritten the plot, so you are not the vulnerable character anymore. The real trap is that they feel it. They helped you genuinely, expected nothing in return, and now they are picking up coldness from someone they just supported. It stings more precisely because they cannot name why. If you want to keep people close after they have helped you, the move is not to repay them immediately or prove you did not need them. It is to let yourself be actually grateful without the armor of defensiveness. Say it plainly. Sit with the discomfort of owing something. That vulnerability, paradoxically, rebuilds trust faster than pretending the debt does not exist. The people who stick around are not the ones who keep score. They are the ones who can hold the awkwardness of being needed without turning it into resentment. Moral licensing after kindness. You helped a friend move on Saturday, drove 5 hours in your truck, carried boxes until your shoulders burned, didn't complain once. By Tuesday, the same friend asks if you can grab coffee and listen about their relationship mess. Your first thought arrives like a small spark of irritation. And here's where it gets interesting. You are not tired because of moving boxes. You are tired because your brain just handed you permission to be impatient, to be less generous, maybe even to be a little unkind. That's moral licensing, and it happens to nearly everyone. After you do something good, your brain creates an invisible ledger, a kind of internal credit system. You made a deposit. Now it feels strangely safe to make a withdrawal. You were selfless on Saturday, so being a bit selfish on Tuesday doesn't threaten your self-image as a good person. It feels balanced. It feels earned. The trap is that this happens almost entirely outside your awareness. You don't consciously think, I earned the right to be grumpy now. You just feel the grumpiness rise, and it seems completely justified, even natural. Research confirms this pattern across contexts. People who donate to charity are more likely to cheat moments later. People who recycle conscientiously sometimes feel licensed to waste energy elsewhere. A big act of generosity can actually make you stingier in the very next interaction, because psychologically, you have already proven you are a good person. You don't need to keep proving it. The proof is sitting in your past. But here's the catch that matters. Your character doesn't work like a savings account with a balance. It doesn't get built on past deposits. It lives entirely in what you do right now, with the person standing in front of you. So when you feel that subtle permission slip arriving, that quiet whisper saying, well, I was kind yesterday, so pause. That is the exact moment to stay honest. Not to the person you were yesterday, but to the person asking something of you today. Compensatory hostility budget. You know that colleague who is painfully polite all day, the one who says yes to everything, smiles through meetings, never pushes back, and then goes home and yells at their partner over a burnt dinner? Or the friend who is endlessly generous in public but bizarrely cruel when nobody is watching? That is not a glitch. That is a budget system running out of funds. Your capacity for patience, agreeableness, and self-restraint is finite. Neurologically finite. When you spend it all on managing yourself in one context, you do not have much left over for another. The hostility, or irritability, harshness, coldness, shows up where the stakes feel lower or where you have permission to be yourself. It is compensation, not contradiction. Think of it like emotional currency. You cannot give away your warmth all day and expect to arrive home full. The person who swallowed their frustration in a boardroom, who performed agreeableness in front of their boss, who bit their tongue through a difficult client call, they saborateurs de return de conabidur. Edicor, they are depleted. Their capacity for patience with a loved one's small mistake has simply evaporated. What makes this pattern so invisible is that the hostile version reflects a real you, not a breakdown of who you actually are. You are not faking niceness, you are spending it, and once the budget empties, what emerges is what was underneath all along. Maybe hurt, maybe exhaustion, maybe anger that never had permission to surface. The real problem is not your private bad behavior, but that you are directing your social energy toward the wrong places at costs you cannot sustain. Sometimes the move is to be less polite where it matters less, so you have something left for where it matters more. The person closest to you should not be the one receiving your scraps. They should be the one who gets your surplus if you have built a life where surplus is even possible. The cost of being witnessed. There's a moment in most close relationships when someone really sees you, not the edited version you show at work or the performance you run for acquaintances, but the actual, messier, more complicated thing underneath. And something strange happens after that. You feel lighter for about 20 minutes. Then you start to feel exposed, almost hunted. You begin editing yourself around them. You make jokes quicker to diffuse the weight. You turn conversations toward them to shift focus away from yourself. You become, in other words, less honest. Being truly witnessed is terrifying because it means you can no longer tell yourself a comfortable lie about who you are. The person saw the crack in your certainty. They know you're less confident than you pretend. They've glimpsed your capacity for pettiness, or fear, or need, and now you can't unknow that they know. So you change the dynamic. You pull back. You perform again, but now with the added burden of knowing they've seen behind the curtain. This is why some of the most vulnerable moments in relationships are followed by coldness or distance. Not because the vulnerability itself was bad, but because it cost you the comfortable fiction you'd been living inside. The people closest to you become the ones you're most offended against because they carry evidence. They have data on you. And part of your brain experiences that as a threat. The cost of being witnessed isn't shame exactly. It's the loss of plausible deniability about yourself. Once someone has truly seen you, you have to live with their knowledge in the room, and that requires constant energy to manage. The interesting move is to stop treating being known as a liability and start treating it as the actual price of intimacy. Not everyone can handle paying it, but the ones who do, the ones who stay soft even after being seen, those relationships become the only ones that matter. They're the ones where you don't have to hold your breath. Shame-driven withdrawal. You notice your partner suddenly stops asking about your day, or a friend who used to text constantly just vanishes from the group chat. Then weeks pass and you wonder if you hurt them, if something went wrong. But when you finally ask, they say they're fine. They're not fine. What you're watching is shame doing its quiet work, and it looks almost exactly like coldness from the outside, even though it's the opposite thing happening inside. Shame isn't anger turned inward. It's a full retreat. When someone feels truly ashamed, they don't just feel bad about what they did, they feel bad about who they are. And that feeling is so hot, so unbearable, that the only move that feels safe is to vanish. They withdraw not to punish you, but to protect themselves from being seen. Because if you see them, really see what they think they are, it will be confirmation. So they ghost conversations, skip events, keep responses short. They might say they're tired, busy, going through something, but it's not logic. It's a wound that hates light. Here's what makes this dangerous. You fill the silence with your own story. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they're angry. Maybe the friendship is dead, and while you're building that narrative, they're somewhere else, spiraling, believing they're not worth being around. The withdrawal confirms their shame. Your frustration confirms it more, and neither of you knows you're in a loop, each feeding the other's loneliness. The pattern locks tighter the longer it runs. If someone you care about suddenly becomes distant and vague when confronted, resist the urge to push harder or pull back in equal measure. Try something smaller. Name what you see without judgment, then create space without disappearing yourself. Say something like, "I notice you've been quiet. I'm not going anywhere." Sometimes, shame just needs permission to stop hiding long enough to be human again. That one line, delivered steady, without anger, can break the spiral faster than weeks of apology or distance ever could. Face saving after embarrassment. You say something stupid in a meeting. Everyone heard it. The room doesn't explode. It just goes quieter, and you feel your face burn. In that moment, your brain is running a calculation that has nothing to do with the actual words you said. It's running a reputation repair algorithm, and it will shape how you act for the next hour, the next week, sometimes longer. The awkwardness you feel isn't just shame. It's your nervous system trying to figure out how to rebuild the image people have of you, and that's where behavior gets genuinely strange. Here's what most people miss. After embarrassment, you don't act like yourself again right away. Instead, you often overcorrect in one of two directions. You become aggressively self-deprecating, turning the moment into a joke before anyone else can. Or you pull back entirely, become quieter, more cautious, sometimes even cold. Neither of those is really you. Both are survival moves. The self-deprecation is an attempt to steal the punchline before someone else swings it at them. The withdrawal is an attempt to become too small to hit again. The trap is that people around you read these corrective behaviors as signals of your actual character, when they're actually just noise from your reputation repair system working overtime. Someone who withdrew might seem unfriendly or distant. Someone who went into self-joke mode might seem insecure or annoying, but they're usually just trying to rewrite the script before anyone else does. If you understand this pattern in others, you start to notice when you're doing it yourself. And when you notice, you can make a choice. You can let the system run on autopilot, or you can simply acknowledge the thing that happened, apologize if it's warranted, and move forward like a person who is genuinely okay, not a person performing okayness. Most people never get there. They stay locked in the repair mode, wondering why everything feels off, unaware that their own face-saving act is the thing creating distance. The awkward memory tax. You remember the cringe moment from 7 years ago, the joke that landed wrong at a dinner party, the name you blanked on in front of someone important, the email you sent before thinking. Your brain pulls it up at 2 a.m. and your face gets hot all over again, even though everyone else has completely forgotten it ever happened. That involuntary wince is the cost of being human, and you're paying it again and again. Compound interest on social pain that stopped mattering to other people the moment it occurred. Every time you recall that moment, your brain reinforces the neural pathway associated with shame, which means the memory doesn't fade. It gets stronger, more vivid, more likely to surface when you're vulnerable and tired. But here's where it gets tricky. People who remember their own embarrassments vividly often become hypervigilant about avoiding new ones. You start calculating before you speak. You shrink a little. You choose safe words over honest ones. You decline invitations because you're not sure you'll say the right thing. The tax compounds not just in memory, but in behavior. You're now paying in real-time currency too, trading authenticity for safety. And the person you're talking to has no idea any of this is happening. They're not thinking about your old mistake at all. They're thinking about themselves, about what they said yesterday, about whether they seemed awkward or off. The liberation hiding in this is almost absurd. The thing you're most afraid they remember, they don't. The shame you're carrying solo is yours alone. So the next time an old cringe surfaces at midnight or in the shower, try naming it differently. Not as proof that you're fundamentally awkward, but as proof that you're paying attention, that you care about connection enough to remember the gaps and missteps. That's not a failure. That's the price of having a conscience. And it's worth more than you think. The people worth knowing understand that already. Avoidance of the witness. There's a moment in every confession that nobody talks about, the instant, right before you admit something true, when you can feel the other person's attention land on you like a weight. Some people lean in. Most people suddenly get very interested in their coffee cup. You've probably noticed that shift in yourself, the instinct to keep someone out of the room where you're being honest. Not because you fear judgment exactly, but because being witnessed changes what the truth means. When nobody is watching, a mistake stays small. small. A failure stays private. A contradiction stays in the shadows, where it doesn't have to be resolved. But the moment another person sees it clearly, it becomes real in a way that forces you to either defend it or change it. And change is harder than silence. So here's what people do instead. They avoid the witness. They keep their vulnerable conversations to text, where tone is invisible. They space out their visits with people who know them too well. They talk to strangers about things they'll never tell their closest friends, because a stranger has no continuity. They won't hold the contradiction against you next Tuesday. Some people unconsciously gravitate toward friends or partners who are preoccupied, distracted, or emotionally distant, not because they don't love them, but because a distracted witness is still technically a witness without the full weight of presence. And the truly clever version is when people become the witness for everyone else, endlessly listening to other people's stories, asking questions, creating the illusion of intimacy, while never actually being seen themselves. It's a perfect escape route. The trap is that avoidance works. In the short term, you dodge the discomfort of being fully known, but long term, it means the parts of you that need to grow stay frozen. So the quiet move here is to notice where you're editing yourself and ask which audience you're afraid of. That answer usually tells you who you most need to be honest with. Vulnerability, hangover. You tell someone something true about yourself, maybe about a fear, a mistake, a quiet shame you've carried, and in that moment, you feel lighter, maybe even closer to them. Then the next day hits different. You see their name, and your stomach tightens. You replay what you said. You wonder if they're judging you now, or worse, if they've lost respect. That sick feeling is the vulnerability hangover, and it catches almost everyone off guard because you expected to feel better, not worse. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. Vulnerability is neurologically expensive. When you breach your own protective walls, your nervous system goes into a kind of debt. You've exposed something, and your brain's job is to protect you. So even though the other person did nothing wrong, even though they probably felt honored you trusted them, your threat detection system wakes up and starts scanning for danger. Did you reveal too much? Are they storing this against you? Will they use it? The anxiety isn't logical. It's your body doing what it evolved to do, which is keep you safe by making you hyper-vigilant about social risk. The real trap is what you do next. Some people pull back, create distance, suddenly act cold to test if the person is still trustworthy. Others over-explain or apologize for being vulnerable, which is just shame dressed up as politeness. A few stay steady and let the discomfort pass, which usually takes a day or two. The hangover fades fastest when you don't fight it or act on it, when you sit with the weird feeling and let it be true that you can be both vulnerable and safe at the same time. If you're in this right now, don't contact them to soften what you said. Don't apologize for being honest. Just notice that your nervous system is doing exactly what it's built to do. And wait, the closeness you felt was real. The fear is real too. Both can live in the same moment. Over-disclosure, regret distancing. You tell someone something real about yourself. A fear, a failure, a secret shame. And for a moment, you feel closer to them. Then hours or days pass, and a cold feeling creeps in. You start noticing how they look at you now. Did they judge you? Do they pity you? Suddenly, you're wondering if you made a terrible mistake. And the easiest way to make that feeling stop is to put distance between you. You become quieter, less vulnerable, a little colder back. What just happened is over-disclosure regret, and it blindsides you because you won't even blame yourself. You'll blame them for not being trustworthy enough to handle what you told them. Here's what's actually happening. The moment that regret hits, your nervous system reads it as danger, not because sharing was wrong, but because vulnerability always carries real risk, and your brain is now hyper-aware of it. So you unconsciously start a slow retreat. You stop initiating texts. Conversations get lighter. You mentally compile reasons why they were never quite your kind of person anyway, and they feel it. They might not know why the warmth changed, but they sense the shift, and often they withdraw too. The whole dynamic tilts in real time, and neither of you fully understands why closeness turned into quiet estrangement. The move that actually works is to sit with the discomfort instead of acting from it. That regret feeling is not a verdict. It's just your nervous system running threat detection after you took a risk. Sometimes that risk lands well. Sometimes the person fumbles it, not out of malice, but out of their own awkwardness or limits. But the distancing you do preemptively, the cold shoulder you manufacture to protect yourself from their potential judgment, that one's entirely on you. Before you go distant on someone for how they handled your honesty, Check whether you're really reacting to them or whether you're just scared of being seen. That small check, done quietly in your own mind, changes everything that follows. The intimacy thermostat. Remember that friend who used to text you every day, then suddenly went quiet for weeks, not because you fought, but because things felt too close? That shift is not random. It is your nervous system hitting a limit it never had to think about before. Most of us have an intimacy thermostat, and when the dial gets turned up too high, we instinctively back away to cool things down. It happens in romantic partnerships, friendships, even family relationships, and almost nobody talks about it because it feels like rejection, when really it is regulation. The person is not running from you. They are adjusting the temperature back to what feels survivable. Here is what makes it tricky. The thermostat is not set consciously. It got calibrated during childhood based on what felt safe, what felt suffocating, what love looked like in your house. If closeness came with chaos, or independence meant abandonment, or emotional openness felt dangerous, your system learned to pull back right when things got tender. If your thermostat is set different from theirs, say you want constant reassurance and they need breathing room, you will experience their pullback as cold, while they experience your need as pressure. You keep reaching, they keep retreating. Both of you think the other person changed, that they stopped caring, or grew distant. The move is not to turn up the heat harder, or interpret silence as proof they never loved you. It is to name it quietly. I notice we both seem to need different amounts of space right now. That is not a flaw in either of us. That one sentence opens the door to adjusting the dial together, instead of fighting over who said it wrong. The thermostat can shift if both people understand what temperature of closeness each of them learned to survive. When someone suddenly goes distant, ask yourself what temperature might feel dangerous to them, what their history taught them about love being safe, and whether your own thermostat is asking them to stay warmer than they learned to live with. That small reframing can turn a slow fade into actual conversation. Approach avoidance in closeness. You lean in to confess something real. They pull back, not dramatically, just a small shift, a tightening. You keep talking. They get quieter, busier, suddenly checking their phone. What happened? Nothing terrible occurred in that moment, but something in them activated like a warning light. That's approach avoidance conflict in the space between two people, and it's one of the most common invisible forces that makes relationships feel broken when nobody did anything wrong. Here's how it works. Someone wants closeness. They genuinely do, but the closer it gets, the more a different need fires up. Safety, space, control, the need to not be known so completely that they become trapped or exposed. So they do both things at once. They reach toward you and push away simultaneously, and it leaves you standing in the middle of a mixed signal that feels personal but isn't. This isn't them not loving you. It's them loving the idea of you while being terrified of the reality, the vulnerability, the accountability, the way real closeness demands you stay present instead of retreating into your phone or work or silence. So they get closer on their terms, maybe through humor, maybe through texts, maybe through sex. But when you try to move closer on actual emotional ground, something in them slams a door. Watch for the pattern. Someone texts you constantly, but cancels plans last minute. They talk vulnerably, then ghost for a week. They say they want a real relationship, but run when one actually forms. They're not playing games. They're genuinely pulled in two directions. The part of them that's lonely and wants to be seen is real. The part of them that wants to run is equally real. The sticky move isn't to chase harder, it's to notice where you stop. Stop pursuing the version of them they show you sometimes and start paying attention to the version that consistently appears when things get real. That pattern, that's the honest answer. Attachment activation under stress. Think about the last time you were genuinely scared or overwhelmed. Bad news, a health scare, a financial shock. Notice who you wanted near you. Not the person who makes logical sense. Not the problem solver you'd normally text. You wanted that person. The one who's been there since you were young, or the one who just sits without judgment, or maybe just a voice on the phone saying they're coming over. That pull isn't logic. That's attachment waking up under pressure, your whole nervous system reorganizing itself in real time. When threat arrives, your rational brain gets dimmed down, and your attachment circuits light up like a flare gun. Suddenly, you're not thinking about solutions. You're thinking about safety. You're not assessing which friend is most helpful. You're seeking the person whose presence has historically meant you survive this. It could be a parent, a partner, a sibling who's always caught you. It could even be a place, or a smell, or a particular song. The specific target matters less than the fact that you're regressing toward dependency in that moment, and your body knows exactly what it needs. What makes this tricky is shame. You're supposed to be the competent adult, right? Instead, you're calling your mom at 35 because the world feels too big, or you're clinging to a partner in a way that doesn't fit your normal self. Or you're seeking reassurance over and over because one conversation didn't quite settle the fear, that repetition, that need, that "shouldn't I be over this by now" feeling. All normal. It's not weakness. It's what your attachment system does. It knows that in genuine crisis, togetherness has better odds than solo courage. The stickier move is noticing this before full panic hits. Small moments of stress show you who and what you reach for. That map tells you something true about where your safety actually lives. The next time stress rises, watch where your body wants to go. Protest behavior before withdrawal. Your partner starts an argument about something small, maybe the dishes, maybe your tone, and you think, this is about dishes? But it's not. What you're watching is protest behavior, and it usually shows up right before someone pulls away for real. Think of it like a final push, a last-ditch effort to get a response, to matter, to fix something before they decide it's unfixable. They're not angry because they've given up. They're angry because they haven't yet. The withdrawal comes after. Here's the part most people miss. Protest behavior looks like fighting, so you assume the relationship is still engaged. You might even think, good, at least they care enough to argue. But neuroscientist John Gottman found that people often escalate conflict dramatically right before they emotionally check out. It's a final flare, not a sign of hope. The arguing, the pushing, the "you never listen to me" cycle, that's still someone trying to be heard. They haven't surrendered the project of being understood by you yet, which is why the energy feels so fierce and desperate. The trap is that many people respond to protest with dismissal or counter-escalation, not realizing they're being given a last signal before the door closes. A partner who is truly indifferent doesn't protest, they just go quiet. Once they stop trying, once the protest energy dies and becomes a flat, patient acceptance of distance, the relationship has already shifted into withdrawal mode without you quite catching it. The withdrawn version shows up as that resigned silence, the person who stops arguing because they've stopped hoping the argument will land. By that point, they've already had the conversation with themselves about whether you're worth fighting for, and they've decided you're not. If you notice someone protesting hard about not being heard or valued, ask yourself, am I reading this as them being difficult or as a last attempt to reconnect? Because the difference determines everything that comes next. A protest is still a conversation. Withdrawal is someone having decided the conversation ended. Deactivating strategies. When someone stops fighting back, stops protesting, stops even trying to explain themselves, you often think they've given up, but something stranger is happening underneath. They've switched modes. Instead of pushing against the conflict, they're draining it of fuel by becoming small, agreeable, almost invisible. That's a deactivating strategy, and it's one of the most common survival moves people make when they feel cornered or unsafe in a relationship. It looks like compliance. It feels like peace. It's actually a reflex wearing a disguise. Think of the partner who suddenly agrees with everything you say, who stops sharing opinions, who becomes eerily calm when you raise your voice. Or the friend who cancels plans, gets quieter, says, "It's fine, whatever you want," to every question. Not because they mean it, but because engaging feels dangerous. The nervous system is basically saying, if I don't matter enough to fight for, then I'll stop mattering altogether. It's not resignation exactly, it's a calculated invisibility. And here's what makes it stick around. Deactivating strategies often work in the moment. The conflict does settle. The other person does get what they want. You feel relief. So both people lock into the pattern. One person pushing, one person shrinking, and neither realizes they're not actually connected anymore. Just synchronized in a dance where one person leads and the other person disappears. The trap is that this can feel stable for years, but underneath, there's usually a slow accumulation of resentment, numbness, or quiet contempt. The person who deactivates starts seeing you as someone to manage rather than someone to be with. They're not angry, they're just gone. And by the time either of you notices, the real work isn't about winning the argument. It's about rebuilding trust when one person has already learned that mattering is too expensive. So if you notice yourself, or someone you care about, getting smaller, Softer, more compliant when conflict rises, that's worth naming. Not as failure, but as a signal that something in the dynamic needs to actually change, not just pause. The devaluation defense. Someone you cared about used to be golden in your mind. Their jokes landed perfect. Their flaws felt like quirks. Their presence was enough to fix an off day. Then something broke. They disappointed you. Or worse, they chose something over you. And now you can't stop listing their actual defects. Their humor seems forced. Their ambition feels shallow. That thing you once found charming is suddenly annoying as hell. Your brain just ran a demolition on their entire value, and it happened faster than you could track it. This is the devaluation defense, and it's not cruelty. It's your mind's way of removing a splinter that went too deep. When someone matters and then hurts us, the cognitive dissonance is brutal. You believed they were good. They acted in a way that contradicted that. Your brain has three choices: accept the disappointment and sit with the pain, blame the circumstances and excuse them, or rewrite the story so they were never that good in the first place. The third option stings the least, so that's the one your brain picks every time. Devaluing them shrinks the injury. If they were never that special, then their rejection doesn't mark you. If their betrayal came from someone shallow, not someone you genuinely misjudged, then your judgment stays intact and your self-image stays safe. Here's what makes this tricky. The devaluation feels absolutely true. You're not lying to yourself. You're genuinely seeing new things. But you're also not seeing the whole picture. You're looking through a very specific lens, one that filters out the evidence that contradicts your new story. The person didn't actually change. Your mind turned the volume way up on everything wrong and way down on everything right. The defense works until it doesn't, until you bump into someone else doing the exact same thing to you, and suddenly you recognize the pattern from the outside. That mirror moment, uncomfortable as it is, might be the most honest one you've had in a while. Splitting under emotional load. You've probably noticed it in yourself or someone you love. Under enough stress, a person's personality almost fractures. The careful, patient partner snaps at small things. The stable friend suddenly sees enemies everywhere. The person who was fine yesterday is now convinced everyone has abandoned them. It's not performance, and it's not manipulation. When emotional pain gets too heavy, the brain literally switches how it processes people and situations. Psychologists call this splitting, and it's a survival mechanism that goes haywire when the load gets too much. Under normal conditions, you hold contradictory truths in your head without breaking a sweat. Your boss is smart, but sometimes petty. Your sibling is thoughtful, but also selfish. You yourself are capable and also sometimes scared. That nuance is the mature operating system, and it takes real executive function to keep it running. But when the nervous system floods, when grief or fear or rejection overwhelms the circuit, that nuance gets jettisoned. Things go binary. People become all good or all bad, all trustworthy or all dangerous. A single harsh word rewrites the whole story of a relationship backward. The brain is essentially saying, I cannot hold both truths right now, so I am going to pick one and believe it absolutely. This is not stupidity. It is what happens when your threat detection system has been screaming for too long. The sticky part is that the person splitting does not feel like they're distorting reality. They feel like they finally see clearly, like everyone was just gaslighting them before. And once you believe that, you act on it. Distance appears. Accusations fly. Relationships rupture fast. If you recognize this pattern in someone close to you, the move is not to argue them out of it. You cannot logic someone out of a state their nervous system decided to enter. The quieter move is to help them feel safe enough that the nuance can come back on its own. Patience here is not weakness. It's the only frequency that works. Projection of disowned traits. You notice someone at work who is obsessed with order, who corrects people's grammar, who seems brittle about anything messy or spontaneous. Then one day, they snap at someone for being too controlling, too rigid. You think that's rich coming from them, but here's what's actually happening. They hate in others what they have locked away in themselves. The very thing that makes them flinch is the thing they refuse to own. That's projection, and it's one of the oldest tricks the human mind plays to keep the peace with itself. We all do it. You probably have a type of person who makes your blood hot immediately. Someone selfish, or needy, or cold, or fake. Before you nod along with that feeling, ask yourself, what version of that trait lives in me that I don't want to see? Because the people who trigger us hardest are usually mirrors of something we've disowned. If you were truly neutral about a trait, you wouldn't care that someone else had it. But when it makes you rage or contempt sick, You're watching yourself on their face. The dangerous part is that we don't just feel this internally, we act on it. We judge them harshly, we distance ourselves, we keep ourselves small and defended, and we miss the message entirely. The quiet reframe is this: the next time someone's behavior makes you feel hot anger or moral superiority, pause and ask what they're showing you about yourself. Not in a guilty way. In a curious way. Maybe they're selfish in ways you don't allow yourself to be. Maybe they're needy in ways you've learned to suppress. Maybe they're reckless, where you've forced yourself rigid. What would it look like to reclaim that piece of yourself, but consciously, on your own terms? That's where the real freedom lives. Not in condemning them, but in understanding that your reaction is often the first clue that something inside you is still waiting to be heard. And every time you can see that, you take back a little of your power. Projective identification pull. You walk into a room with someone who's carrying shame about their mistakes, and somehow, without them saying a word, you start feeling ashamed on their behalf. That magnetic pull, where someone else's disowned emotion suddenly becomes yours, is projective identification, and it operates like a silent hook embedded in almost every relationship that leaves you drained and confused. Here's how it actually works. When people can't tolerate a feeling inside themselves, rage, weakness, jealousy, failure, they don't just suppress it and move on. They unconsciously project it outward into the space around them. But then, and this is the crucial part, they create conditions that pull you into actually embodying it. They provoke you subtly, make small jabs, send mixed signals, until you feel the thing they can't feel. A parent who can't face their own anger makes you the angry one, then punishes you for it. A partner drowning in self-doubt makes careful comments that erode your confidence until you're doubting yourself instead of them. You've absorbed their emotional problem by sheer proximity and repetition, and the chemistry feels seamless, almost natural. The trap deepens because once you're holding that feeling, they feel relieved. The pressure lifts from them like fog burning off in morning sun. So they keep pulling, consciously or not, and you keep carrying it forward, deeper and deeper. This is why you can feel drained around certain people, even if nothing concrete happened. No conflict, no explicit demands made. You're not tired from the interaction itself. You're exhausted from managing someone else's shadow self, their disowned piece. The way out is noticing when a feeling doesn't belong to you, not the hollow observation that, "I shouldn't feel this," which is useless and self-blaming, but the actual recognition that this emotion arrived as a visitor, not a permanent resident of your own mind. When you catch it, you can set it down. The moment you stop absorbing their disowned feelings, the whole dynamic collapses. They either face what's inside them, or they find someone else who will carry it. Either way, you get yourself back. Emotional contagion lag. Your partner walks in after a terrible day at work, radiating frustration, tight jaw, clipped words. The whole room feels smaller. You try to stay neutral, try to be the calm one, but 15 minutes later, you notice you're irritated too. Not because anything bad happened to you. You've caught their mood like a virus, except there's a strange delay between when they started feeling it and when you fully landed in it. That gap, that lag, is where the real mechanics of emotional contagion live. And it's worth understanding because it changes how you interpret what's actually happening in the room. Your nervous system doesn't instantly mirror someone else's state. There's a lag of minutes, sometimes longer, where you're absorbing their energy without fully realizing you're doing it. Your mirror neurons are firing. Your breathing is syncing to theirs. Your facial muscles are beginning to match their expression, but your conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. So you feel a creeping heaviness or irritability and assume it's coming from you, from something you did or didn't do, or something you should worry about. That misattribution is the trap. You blame yourself or the situation when actually you're just standing downwind of someone else's emotional weather. The person who brought the mood in often doesn't realize they're projecting it either. They're so deep in their own state that they don't clock the moment it started shifting you. So both of you end up confused. One person thinking they caused the problem, the other person unaware they're the source. If you can name the lag, you can work with it. When someone walks in heavy, try literally stepping back or opening a window. Create space. Give yourself permission to not take on their emotional temperature immediately. Let them sit with it for a bit while you stay tethered to your own nervous system. That small friction, that refusal to instantly sync, is often enough to keep their bad day from becoming your bad night. The delay isn't a flaw, it's an opening. Limbic resonance and mismatch. You walk into a room where two people are having a quiet conversation and something feels wrong even though no one raised their voice. One person is smiling, but their shoulders are tight. The other is nodding, but their breath is shallow and quick. Their words say everything is fine, but their nervous systems are screaming at each other. And somehow you feel it too, like a tuning fork vibrating next to one that's slightly off pitch. That's limbic resonance in action. And when it goes wrong, it's called mismatch. Your limbic system, the ancient emotional brain underneath all your rational thought, is constantly syncing with the nervous systems around you. It's not telepathy, it's biology. When someone you trust walks in calm and regulated, your own heart rate settles, your breathing deepens, your guard comes down. But when someone's nervous system is dysregulated, that discord transfers to you like a contagion. You don't know why you suddenly feel tense around your usually friendly colleague, but their unprocessed stress is broadcasting on a frequency your body picks up before your mind can even name it. Mismatch happens when the signal doesn't match the story. Someone says, "I'm fine," but their voice is tight. Someone laughs, but their eyes stay hard. Your nervous system clocks the lie immediately, even if your conscious mind wants to believe them. And that friction, that tiny war between what they're saying and what they're broadcasting, creates a subtle exhaustion in you. You're trying to sync with them, but the channels don't line up. The deeper trap is this: the people closest to you can dysregulate your system faster than anyone else, precisely because you're most tuned to them. A partner's unspoken anger, a parent's hidden disappointment. These aren't things you think your way out of. Your nervous system has already decided the room isn't safe. The move is small, but real. Notice when you feel jangled around someone, and don't assume it's about you. Their system might just be running a frequency your body refuses to match. Cortisol-driven misreading. You walk into a room and your boss looks up from their desk. That glance, half a second, maybe less, lands on you like an accusation. Your stomach tightens. They must be mad. They're upset with that report. By the time you sit down, you've already written a whole narrative about what you did wrong, how you're failing, why this job is hanging by a thread. The thing is, your boss was thinking about lunch, but your nervous system wasn't reading their face. It was reading your own cortisol spike, the stress hormone flooding your bloodstream when you're tired, hungry, or already wound tight from something else entirely. When cortisol is high, your brain doesn't see neutral faces. It sees threat. A tired smile becomes a sneer. A busy silence becomes judgment. A normal Tuesday becomes evidence that everything is crumbling. This isn't your imagination playing tricks. It's your biology hijacking your perception, sharpening threat detection while dulling your ability to read nuance, context, warmth, and the thousand small signals that mean nothing at all. You become a conspiracy theorist about other people's moods, seeing rejection in places where there's just ordinary human distraction or fatigue. The misreading compounds too. You pull back, get defensive, over-explain yourself, and suddenly the other person actually does become confused or irritated, which confirms your original anxious reading. You've created the exact problem you were panicked about from the inside out. The move isn't white-knuckling your way into false optimism or pretending everything is fine. It's noticing when your threat detection is running hot and asking yourself the ground-level questions. Did you sleep badly last night? Skip breakfast? Already carrying stress from something unrelated? If yes, you know your reading of that interaction is being filtered through a cortisol lens, not through reality. Before you respond to someone's face or tone, check in with your body first. Am I in panic mode? Sometimes the secret someone is hiding isn't about you at all. It's about whether you're running on empty. That pause matters more than you think. Interoceptive noise mistaken for mood. You wake up feeling off, dark, like the world is wrong, or you are wrong in it. So you scroll through your phone, looking for the reason. Did someone upset you? Is the news bad? Did you do something wrong? And then, 2 hours later, you eat something, stretch a little, drink water, and suddenly, the darkness lifts. Nothing external changed. Nobody texted you an apology. The news is the same. But your whole emotional weather system shifted because your body finally got what it needed. This is interoception, your brain's ability to sense what's happening inside your body. And when it's noisy, your mind fills in the blanks with stories. Your body is always sending signals: hunger, fatigue, muscle tension, hormonal shifts, inflammation, dehydration. Most of the time, you don't consciously notice these whispers. But when they're loud or novel, your brain has to interpret them, and it doesn't always get the label right. That flutter in your chest could be anxiety about your presentation, or it could be too much coffee. That heaviness in your limbs could be depression creeping back, or it could be you haven't moved in 8 hours. That irritability could mean you're angry at your partner, or it could mean you're hungry. Here's the trap. Your mind is a story machine. It will absolutely commit to a narrative. You feel tension and conclude someone hurt you. You feel low energy and convince yourself you're broken. You feel restless and decide your life is wrong. And once you've picked the story, you start looking for evidence to prove it. You reread texts for hidden slights. You catalog your flaws. You imagine leaving. The move is gentler than it sounds. Before you reorganize your life around a mood, ask, when did I last eat well, sleep well, move, hydrate? Sometimes the feeling is real, but the diagnosis is wrong. Your body is not your enemy, sending coded warnings. It's often just noisy, and noise gets mistaken for truth, hunger, and moral judgment. You're at the grocery store at 3 in the afternoon, on a day you skipped lunch, and someone cuts in front of you in the checkout line. Your first thought is probably not charitable. Fast forward to that same person cutting in line when you're full, rested, and content. Suddenly you might give them the benefit of the doubt, assume they didn't see you. Maybe they're having a rough day. Same person, same action, different moral verdict. The difference is your blood sugar. When your body is running on fumes, your brain gets stingy with empathy, and your moral code becomes sharper, stricter, less forgiving. This is not weakness or cruelty. It is your nervous system protecting you. Hunger triggers a kind of physiological urgency that rewires how you evaluate fairness, intention, and transgression. It's harder to see nuance when you're depleted. It's harder to assume good faith. The person becomes a threat or an obstacle faster than they would otherwise. And here's where it gets real. You probably do not feel like your hunger is making you judge harshly. You feel like you're just seeing the truth more clearly, that the person was genuinely rude, that standards have slipped. That's the trap. Your moral judgment hasn't sharpened. Your empathy bandwidth has narrowed because your body is in scarcity mode. Now think about the people around you. Your partner after a long workday, your kid before dinner, your colleague who skipped breakfast. When they snap, when they seem cold or demanding or quick to anger, you are often not dealing with their true nature. You are dealing with a depleted version of their nervous system. The stick move here is not to excuse bad behavior, but to notice the gap between who someone is and who they become when they're hungry, tired, or running on empty. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is hand someone a snack before you have a conversation about how they just hurt you. Sleep debt hostility bias. You've seen it happen. Someone snaps at you over nothing and later apologizes with, "I barely slept." We treat sleep as a luxury, but your brain treats it like a survival need. And when you're running on fumes, the threat detection system goes haywire. 2 nights of poor sleep doesn't just make you tired, it rewires how you interpret other people's faces, words, and intentions. A neutral tone becomes hostile. A distracted look becomes a personal slight. A simple question becomes an accusation. This isn't weakness or mood swings. It's neurobiology. The amygdala, your brain's alarm bell, becomes hyperactive without sleep. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that says, "Wait, maybe they didn't mean it that way," goes offline. You're literally less able to give people the benefit of the doubt because your brain is in survival mode, scanning for threats that aren't there. Here's where it gets sticky. Sleep debt is invisible. The person snapping isn't trying to be hostile, and you probably can't tell by looking at them whether they slept 3 hours or 8. So you interpret their sharpness as their personality, their mood as their feeling about you, when really they're just someone whose threat filter is broken. This explains why exhausted partners, colleagues, and friends seem to suddenly change. They're not actually different people. They're running on a corrupted system. They can't help it any more than your phone can help its battery dying. The thing nobody mentions, you do this too. Every night you short yourself on sleep is a night your hostility bias tightens, your patience thins, your ability to read people charitably weakens. You're not becoming meaner. You're becoming more primitive, more reactive, less capable of nuance. When someone's snapping without cause, one honest question might be, did they sleep last night? And when you're the one feeling prickly and ready to fight over small things, the real enemy probably isn't the person in front of you at all. Ego depletion, politeness, collapse. You've noticed it, maybe without naming it. The person who was charming and patient all day snaps at their partner over dinner. The friend who listened carefully for 2 hours suddenly gets sharp about something tiny. The boss who smiled through every morning meeting walks past you without a hello. What shifted isn't their character, it's their gas tank. We don't think of politeness as work, but it absolutely is. Every moment you hold your tongue, bite back a complaint, or paste on the professional voice you take actual fuel. Decision-making, emotional regulation, impulse control, they all draw from the same battery. When that battery drains, politeness is one of the first things you lose because it's a luxury, not a survival need. Rudeness is cheaper than kindness when you're running on empty. The collapse happens fastest with people closest to you because they're where you finally let the mask slip. Your partner, your kids, your inner circle. They often pay the tax for all the emotional labor you spent on everyone else. You held it together for the meeting, the client call, the stranger at the store. By the time you're home, there's almost nothing left to give. Here's what makes it dangerous. People take it personally. They think they've done something wrong or that you don't care about them anymore. They don't realize you're not actually angry at them. You're just too tired to keep performing. The quieter knowledge is that noticing this in yourself gives you a choice. When you feel that depletion arriving, when you catch yourself being short, you can name it. "I'm running low" is different from being a cruel person, and sometimes just that awareness lets you ask for something small. 5 minutes of quiet, a shift toward shorter conversations, a gentle hand instead of talking. The person across from you probably needs that signal too. They're not trying to pick a fight, they're just out of resources. Frustration. Aggression spillover. You've had a terrible day at work. A client humiliated you in a meeting. Your boss dismissed an idea you spent hours on. The printer jammed 3 times. You arrive home completely wrung out, and your partner asks a simple question about dinner plans. Something inside you snaps. You respond with sharp words that have nothing to do with the question itself, and they look hurt, confused. Neither of you understands why a small thing triggered such a disproportionate reaction. But here's what happened. Your frustration from earlier didn't evaporate. It built up like water behind a dam, and your partner accidentally opened the gate. This is frustration, aggression spillover. The way anger from one situation bleeds into an entirely different context, aimed at someone who had nothing to do with the original wound. The mechanism is almost mechanical. Your nervous system was already activated, your threat response primed. When the next irritation arrives, it doesn't land on a calm person. It lands on someone already running hot, someone whose tolerance has been burned down to nothing. And here's what matters. The person absorbing that spillover usually interprets it as personal rejection, not as a response to a stressful day. They don't know about the meeting or the printer, they just know you were mean. So they either withdraw or push back. And now you're both stuck in a conflict that actually started hours ago, in a room you're not even in. The real trap is repetition. Each time this happens, the other person's trust gets a small fracture. They start bracing themselves when you come home tired, becoming defensive before you've said anything wrong. That's when spillover stops being an accident and becomes the texture of a relationship. The antidote requires presence. Before you step into a conversation with someone close after a rough day, pause long enough to name what you're carrying. Even just internally, say to yourself, "I'm tired and frustrated," and none of that is their fault. That single acknowledgement creates enough space for your nervous system to downshift. You might still be frustrated, but your partner stops being a target. Displaced aggression chains. Your boss criticizes your work in front of the team. You swallow it, nod, say nothing. 2 hours later, you're snapping at your partner over how they loaded the dishwasher. They didn't deserve that. The dishwasher doesn't deserve that. But somewhere inside you, there's pressure that needs somewhere to go, and they happen to be closest and safest. That's displaced aggression, and it's not a one-time thing. It chains. Once you've blown at one person, the energy doesn't fully discharge. Some of it lingers, making you primed to blow again at the next person, even over something smaller. Your partner gets frustrated and snaps at their coworker. Your coworker goes home and yells at their kid. The kid kicks the dog. One moment of misdirected anger creates a ripple that travels through relationships, like a circuit, looking for the next weakest connection. What makes it vicious is that the original cause gets buried. Your partner didn't know you were angry about your boss. Their coworker didn't know what was eating them. The kid's dog didn't do anything. Each person in the chain is convinced they're reacting to something real, when really they're just the next conductor for someone else's unspent voltage. The people who suffer most are usually the ones you trust most, because they're the safe place to fall apart. Which means they're also the safe place to fall angry. If you want to break the chain, the move isn't to be nicer. When you're loaded with rage, you can't discharge at the source. It's to notice the pressure before it spills sideways, and actually deal with the original thing. Name it to yourself. Sit with it. Let it breathe, instead of making it someone else's problem. Call it out loud if you need to. That small act of stopping the flow at the source is how you don't become the weakest link in someone else's chain, and how you stop being the person who passes the damage forward. Kicking the dog dynamics. You had a terrible meeting at work. Your boss was harsh, dismissive, maybe even humiliating. You swallowed it. You nodded. You came home, and your partner asked a simple question about dinner, and you snapped. Not a normal snap. A disproportionate, vicious snap that surprised even you. The dog looked up. You felt it rising in your chest, that hot, directionless anger, and for a second, you understood exactly why the phrase exists. This is displacement, and it moves through human systems like water finding a crack. The anger cannot go up toward the person with power, so it goes sideways or down toward someone who cannot hurt you back. Your partner takes the hit meant for your boss. Your kid absorbs frustration that belongs to your friend. The dog watches it all. It is not cruelty born from malice. It is cruelty born from powerlessness. And that is almost worse because it happens so fast, you barely notice yourself doing it. Here is what makes it stick. You feel a tiny bit better after. The pressure releases, your nervous system calms, so your brain makes a note that snapping works. Not that it solves anything. The original problem is still there, waiting. But the chemical release is real, and your brain wants to repeat it. Next time something hurts, the pathway is already worn. The people closest to you become the safest targets because they are most forgiving, or most trapped, or both. They will still be there tomorrow. Unlike your boss, they cannot fire you. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, the move is not shame. It is noticing the moment the pressure starts to rise. That tiny pause before you redirect anger downward is where your choice actually lives. Name it to the person you are about to hurt. I am about to snap at you, and this is not about you. That small confession often breaks the cycle before it starts. Ambiguity resolved as hostility. Your colleague doesn't reply to your message for 3 hours. Not unusual, but your chest tightens anyway. Were they annoyed at the meeting? Did you say something wrong? You start replaying the conversation, finding evidence in your own memory. A pause they made, a word choice that might have landed badly. By the time they text back with a simple emoji, you're already halfway convinced they're upset with you. That gap between question and answer, that's where the damage lives. When someone leaves us suspended in uncertainty, our brain doesn't sit idle. It rushes to fill the void, and it almost always fills it with threat. Not because we're pessimistic, but because ambiguity feels dangerous. A clear enemy is easier to handle than a question mark that might become an enemy. So we resolve the ambiguity ourselves, and we resolve it toward the darker interpretation. It's faster, feels safer, and it usually feels true the moment we land on it. Here's where it gets truly sticky. Once you've decided someone is mad at you, you start treating them that way. Your tone changes. You become more defensive, more clipped, more ready for conflict. Your body language shifts. And when they pick up on that shift, and they always do, they respond to it. They don't respond to your old concern. They respond to the coldness they now feel coming from you. So they do get annoyed. The ambiguity resolved itself into exactly the hostility you were afraid of. You created the thing you feared through the act of trying to solve the uncertainty. The move here is small, but ruthless. When you notice yourself filling in blanks about someone's feelings or intentions, pause and ask if you're actually guessing or if you're already predicting. Guesses can be wrong, but once you start treating a guess like a prediction, once you act on it, you turn your story into someone else's reality. That transformation happens faster than you think. The naive realism trap. You know that moment when someone you respect, a parent, a partner, a close friend, describes a situation you were both there for, and you think, we were at the same event. How are you remembering it that differently? What hits hardest is that they're not lying. They're not being difficult. They genuinely believe their version. And so do you. Naive realism is the reason. It's your brain's absolute conviction that you see reality as it actually is, while anyone who disagrees is either irrational, uninformed, or deliberately twisting the truth. Not mistaken differently. Wrong. The trap is that this feels like observation, not opinion. When you see a friend as selfish, you're not making a judgment. You're reporting a fact, the same way they're reporting it when they swear you're the selfish one. You're both certain. You're both wrong in the same way. Here's where it gets sticky. Naive realism makes disagreement feel like an attack on reality itself. If someone contradicts your version of what happened, your brain flags it as a threat, not to your ego, but to your grip on truth. So you push back harder. They push back. Neither of you is actually listening anymore. You're both defending your access to objective reality. The quietly destructive part is that this makes repair nearly impossible. You can't negotiate with someone about facts. You can only dismiss them. And when you dismiss someone on the grounds of reality itself, you've closed every door to understanding. Watch for it in your own life. When you feel certain that someone else is the problem, that's often when naive realism has already won. The people you're most convinced are irrational are usually the most convinced that you are. The small shift worth trying is to catch yourself saying, "The truth is," and replace it with, "From where I'm standing, I see." That tiny language change, admitting perspective exists, sometimes opens a door that certainty slams shut. Attribution asymmetry. In conflict, your partner forgets your birthday. You immediately think, "They don't care about me. They're selfish. This is who they are." Meanwhile, when you forgot their anniversary last month, you had a reason. Work was insane. Your brain was fried. Anyone in your position would have slipped up. Notice the difference? When someone else messes up, we blame their character. When we mess up, we blame our circumstances. That gap is attribution asymmetry, and it is running most of your conflicts without you realizing it. Here is what makes it stick. Your brain does this automatically because you have access to your own interior. The stress you felt, the distraction, the intention that got buried. You lack that interior access for other people. All you see is the action, so your mind fills the gap by assuming malice, negligence, or a deeper flaw. Your partner doesn't have that excuse-making luxury when you hurt them. To them, you just chose to disappoint them. It feels deliberate from the outside. The trap deepens because once you attribute something to character, you start collecting evidence. Your partner forgets your birthday. Selfish. They snap at you during dinner. Selfish. They space on a plan you made. Selfish. You are not updating your theory anymore. You are just feeding it. And the more you feed it, the more you respond as if it is true, which often makes them actually withdraw or become defensive, which feels like proof that your original read was right all along. The small move. When someone close to you does something hurtful, pause and ask what circumstances might have created that action. Not to excuse it, just to see the full picture. Then tell them what was happening inside you when you hurt them. Not to make them forgive you, but so they stop attributing it to character either. That symmetry is often enough to stop a spiral before it becomes a story you both believe. Behavioral confirmation loops. You meet someone new and decide within minutes that they're shy, so you ask fewer questions. They respond with shorter answers. You interpret the silence as proof of their shyness. Everyone around you nods and agrees. Yes, that person is quiet, but what you just did was build a cage out of your own expectation and then watch them live inside it. That's a behavioral confirmation loop, and it happens so fast you think you're observing truth when really you're creating it. Here's how it actually works. Your brain forms a small belief about someone. They're cold, they're arrogant, they don't like you, they're unreliable. Then, without meaning to, you change your behavior in tiny ways. You lean back instead of forward. You share less. You remember the time they forgot to text, not the 3 times they showed up early. Your changed behavior prompts them to change theirs. Suddenly they're distant with you because you've been distant first, but you don't see your part in it. You only see confirmation. They became exactly who you thought they were, and you feel right. The dangerous part is that you often are right. Not because you predicted them accurately, but because you literally shaped them into that shape through your own invisible reactions. This is especially powerful with people who care about your opinion, who are anxious, or who are new to a group and still figuring out their role. You treat them like they're going to fail, they sense your doubt, and they lean into caution. You smile at someone because you expect warmth. They relax and smile back, and your brain feels brilliant. The escape hatch is smaller than you'd like. You have to notice your own belief before you notice their behavior. That means catching yourself the moment you've decided something about someone and asking what would prove you wrong. Then watch for it, not as evidence, but as possibility. That's the only way to stop playing author and start seeing who they actually are. Self-fulfilling social prophecy. You walk into a room convinced nobody finds you interesting, and within 15 minutes, you're standing alone looking at your phone. Not because of something you said, because of something you believed before you arrived. Your body language tightens, your laugh comes quieter, you ask fewer questions, you lean back instead of leaning in, and people, reading all that contracted energy, naturally drift toward the person who seems more present. Then you leave thinking, "See, I was right. I don't fit here." But you weren't reading reality, you were creating it. This is the meat of self-fulfilling prophecy in social spaces. We are not passive observers of how people treat us. We are constant broadcasters of our own predictions about ourselves, and people are incredibly sensitive receivers. Someone who believes they're the awkward one will move their body awkwardly. Pause too long before speaking. Laugh at jokes that weren't that funny. Apologize for things that don't need apologizing for. All of it signals to the group, stay back, I'm uncomfortable. And so they do. The trap deepens because once the prophecy starts running, it feeds itself. A few people pull away, and your brain grabs that as proof. I knew it. You brace harder, you shrink more. Next week, in a different room with different people, you show up smaller than you need to, and the cycle loops. Here's the crack in the logic though. If your belief shapes the outcome, then changing the belief, or at least testing it, changes the outcome too. Not through fake positivity or forced smiling, but through a simple shift in what you're watching for. Instead of collecting evidence that you don't belong, spend one evening collecting evidence of one real thing someone said to you, one moment you made someone laugh, one conversation that didn't crash. Not to lie to yourself, but to stop letting one old story write all the new ones. Your prophecy is not a prediction, it's a rehearsal, and you can rehearse something different. Expectation leakage in micro-expressions. You walk into a room and someone smiles at you, but for 1/100th of a second before that smile solidifies, their face says something else entirely. A flash of disappointment or skepticism or something closer to dread. You didn't see it consciously, but your nervous system did, and now you feel wrong around them, even though their words are all warmth. That flicker is expectation leakage, and it happens because your face moves faster than your intention, faster than the story you want to tell. When we greet someone, our genuine expectation about them appears on our face first, before the social mask slides over it. It's not a lie exactly. It's more like a preview of the real movie before the trailer starts. Your boss's eyes narrow for one frame when you ask for time off, revealing they already expected you'd disappoint them. Your partner's mouth tightens when you say you're excited about their work event, showing they didn't expect you to mean it. These aren't deliberate calculations. The person often has no idea their expectations just leaked out loud into the room. You're not actually responding to their polite words. You're responding to that microsecond of truth your body caught without permission. You feel the skepticism, even if you can't name it. You sense the low expectation and start playing smaller, quieter, less yourself, which then confirms what they already believed about you. The cycle feeds itself. Expectation becomes self-fulfilling because you performed the role they already cast you in. Most people broadcast this completely unaware they're doing it. They think they hit it. They think their smile was genuine the whole time. But the other person felt the leak and now carries a small wound, proof that you don't really believe in them. So pay attention to your own face sometime. What expectation leaks out before you manage it? That gap between what you feel and what you show might be exactly where the other person stops trusting you. The Pygmalion feedback loop. You walk into a room and your boss glances at you for half a second longer than usual. Your brain doesn't miss it. Suddenly you're wondering if you said something wrong in the meeting, if your work isn't up to par, if you're about to be sidelined. So you go quiet. You second-guess your ideas. You stop volunteering for projects. And your boss, noticing the change, figures maybe you're checked out, starts passing your tasks to someone else. Within weeks, you've actually become the less engaged employee you were never meant to be. That's the Pygmalion feedback loop, and it's running constantly in relationships, workplaces, and families, often invisible to both people inside it. The original Pygmalion effect, also called the Rosenthal effect, came from a famous study where teachers were told certain kids in their class were gifted when they were actually chosen at random. By year's end, those kids had genuinely improved more than their peers. Not because they were smarter, but because teachers unconsciously called on them more, gave them longer to answer, smiled at them more, taught them more material. Expectation became reality through 1,000 tiny gestures. Now, reverse it. Someone expects you to fail or withdraw or be difficult, and suddenly those tiny gestures dry up. Less eye contact, shorter conversations, more corrective comments, fewer genuine questions. You feel the cold. You pull back. They interpret that pullback as confirmation. See, they are checked out. And pull back harder. The loop tightens. The stickiest part? You're often not aware it's happening. You just know something shifted. A relationship that felt warm has gone neutral. A connection that felt safe now feels conditional. So the move isn't to convince someone they're wrong about you. That almost never works. It lands like defensiveness. Instead, find one small gesture you can repeat. Ask a genuine question. Show up on time. Say thank you. That breaks the pattern just enough to create a tiny crack in their expectation. People adjust faster to consistent new behavior than you'd think, especially when you don't announce the change. Labeling and identity capture. You're at a dinner party and someone says, "Oh, she's the anxious one." And suddenly, you notice yourself holding your breath differently, sitting a little tighter. By the third time you hear it, you've started to believe it too. Not as an observation, but as a fact about who you are. That label has a strange gravity. It pulls your behavior toward it like a magnet. And what started as someone else's offhand comment becomes your own internal compass. This is identity capture. The moment a casual descriptor swallows the actual person underneath. Labels are cognitive shortcuts. They help us file away complexity fast, which is useful when you're trying to navigate a crowded world. But here's what makes them stick so hard. Once a label attaches to you, your brain stops experimenting. If you're the shy one, you don't test out boldness because that would contradict the filing system. If you're the problem employee, you stop trying to prove otherwise because the label feels fixed, immovable, almost inevitable. The worst part is that other people unconsciously nudge you toward the label too. They expect the anxious version of you, so they give you situations that trigger anxiety. They expect the lazy version, so they don't invite you to the early meetings. The label becomes a cage that everyone, including you, keeps rebuilding without even noticing. What makes this dangerous is how fast it compounds. One label triggers behavior that confirms the label, which makes people reinforce it louder, which makes you believe it deeper. Before you know it, you've organized your entire identity around something that was never true, just convenient. The small move when you catch this happening is to notice the label separately from yourself. You're not anxious. Anxiety happens to you sometimes. You're not lazy. You have low motivation on certain days. That tiny grammatical shift, moving the label from your noun to your verb, cracks open the cage. It reminds you that you are wider, more fluid, and far more capable of change than any single word could ever contain. Cognitive dissonance after harm. You hurt someone you care about. Maybe you snapped at them, cut them out, or said something you can't unsay. And then something strange happens. Your brain doesn't spiral into guilt the way you'd expect. Instead, you find reasons why they deserved it, why they were annoying, why they're too sensitive, why it wasn't actually that bad. You're not lying to yourself on purpose. It just happens, like your mind is rewriting the script in real time to protect something fragile inside. That's cognitive dissonance after harm, and it's how your brain solves an impossible math problem. You did something wrong, but you also believe you're a good person, and those two things can't both be true in your mind. The gap between them creates a grinding discomfort, and your brain will do almost anything to make that discomfort stop. It shrinks the harm in your memory. It exaggerates the other person's flaws. It collects small reasons to justify what you did until suddenly the story feels solid again, and you believe it completely. Here's where it gets dangerous. The more you rehearse this story, the more you actually believe it, and the deeper you dig in. You become someone who's hurt people and found a way to feel okay about it, not through repair, but through rewriting. The person you hurt watches you do this. They watch you rationalize instead of own it, defend instead of listen, and they feel something worse than anger. They feel unseen. They learn that telling you about the damage doesn't matter because you've already decided it didn't happen, and that decision feels safer to you than the truth. When you catch yourself doing this, when you feel that urge to explain, to make it smaller, to collect evidence that you're actually the reasonable one, that urge is the dissonance talking. Real repair starts when you can sit with the discomfort instead of arguing yourself out of it, when you let the gap stay open long enough to actually see what happened and who it hurt. Blame the injured party. You hurt someone, not on purpose. Maybe you said something sharp in a moment of stress, or you forgot a promise, or you were just not there when they needed you. Now they're upset, and instead of sitting with that discomfort, something strange happens inside you. You find reasons why what happened was actually their fault. They're too sensitive. They misunderstood. They shouldn't have expected so much from you. Suddenly, the person you wounded becomes the problem, not the wound itself. This is what psychologists call victim blaming, and it operates so smoothly, most people never notice it happening. It's not cruelty. It's a reflex. When guilt lands on us, we have a choice. Feel it fully or relocate it. Relocating feels faster. It also feels righteous because if they caused it, you don't have to change anything. The injured party absorbs both the original pain and a second injury, the message that their pain isn't real or that they brought it on themselves. Watch how this plays out in everyday life. A friend cuts you off for a month, and you tell mutual friends she's unstable. A family member stays quiet after you snapped at them, and you say they're being passive-aggressive. A partner asks you to show up more, and you say they have impossible standards. A coworker stops sharing ideas in meetings after you dismissed theirs, and you decide they're not a team player. In each case, you've pivoted away from accountability and toward a narrative where the other person is the unreasonable one. The trap is that this works. Your brain feels better instantly. Your friends might even agree with you. The injured party might even start doubting themselves, but something quiet dies in that relationship. Trust learns that wounds don't get healed here. They get explained away. If you want people to stay open to you, the move is counterintuitive. When you've hurt someone, listen to why they're hurt before you defend yourself. That pause is where real connection lives. Just world reasoning against victims. You hear about someone mugged on the street, and before you've even finished processing it, you think they were probably walking alone at night, or they looked distracted, or they were in a neighborhood they shouldn't have been in. Notice what you just did. You instantly rewrote the story so that something about them caused it, not the thief. Them. This is just world reasoning, and it runs so deep that people would rather blame a victim than sit with the terrifying randomness of suffering. Because if bad things only happen to people who deserve them or caused them, then you are safe. Your careful choices protect you. The universe makes sense. But the real world doesn't work that way. And the moment you realize that, you feel smaller. So instead, we all become detectives at crime scenes we didn't witness, hunting for the flaw in someone else's behavior so we can tell ourselves it couldn't happen to us. Watch how fast this happens in conversation. Someone gets laid off and you think they probably didn't adapt fast enough. Someone gets sick and you wonder what they ate or didn't exercise. Someone gets assaulted and you catalog their mistakes. It's not cruelty exactly. It's self-protection wearing the mask of logic. The trap is that it keeps you from actually seeing what happened, and it turns every victim into a cautionary tale instead of a person. Worse, it makes you harden around the people in your life who are already hurting. Because on some level, you need to believe they did something to deserve it. Otherwise, you'd have to feel how fragile everything is. The shift happens when you can hold both truths at once. Yes, some choices matter, but also, some terrible things are just terrible. Bad luck is real. Randomness is real, and victims don't need you to solve them or fix the story. They just need you to see them without needing the universe to make sense first. Effort, justification, loyalty. Think about the person in your life who drives you crazy, but you'd never leave. The one who is difficult, maybe unreliable, but you've already fought so hard for the relationship that abandoning it would feel like admitting you wasted years. That's effort justification at work, and it's one of the stickiest forces keeping people bound to each other. Not because the relationship is good, but because the cost to exit feels unbearable. Your brain doesn't like sunk costs sitting around unresolved. When you've invested time, energy, arguments, and emotional labor into someone, your mind unconsciously revalues that person upward to match what you've already paid. If the investment was huge and the payoff feels small, the math breaks, and broken math feels insane. So instead of leaving, you quietly convince yourself they're worth it. Their quirks are endearing. Their flakiness is actually charm. This isn't love arriving to save the day. It's your mind protecting you from the terrible story you'd have to tell yourself about wasted years. And here's what makes this especially sticky. It works both ways. The person who suffered through awkward dates with you, who stayed up listening to your fears, who showed up during your worst month, they're not necessarily attached to you because you're extraordinary. They're attached because they've paid already. The loyalty isn't based on who you are now. It's anchored to the hours they've already spent. People can stay in situations that make them genuinely unhappy, not out of love, but out of an unconscious need to make their past investment mean something. From the inside, effort justification can feel exactly like devotion, which is why people often can't tell the difference between staying because they want to and staying because leaving would feel like defeat. The quiet move, if you're brave enough, is to notice when someone's staying with you for that reason, and to notice when you're doing it too. Sunk relationship justification. You've been with someone for 7 years. The first 2 were electric. The last 5 have been comfortable, safe, occasionally hollow, and you've told yourself 100 stories about why that's actually fine. You've invested your 20s, your friends know them, your families are tangled now, and the thought of starting over feels catastrophic. so you don't leave. Instead, you keep score of the good moments, amplify them in conversation, and build an invisible case for why this is actually what you wanted all along. The trap isn't that you're lying, it's that you're suddenly motivated to find evidence that supports staying, when the real question, would you choose this person today, from scratch, gets buried under years of accumulated weight. Every day you remain becomes another reason to believe you should remain, because admitting otherwise means admitting loss, so you rewrite the narrative. Small frustrations become character depth, emotional distance becomes independence, the absence of passion becomes maturity, the silence at dinner becomes comfortable. And the worst part is how convincing you become at it, especially to yourself. You'll tell a friend you're happy and almost believe it in the moment because you've practiced the story so many times it feels like truth. But notice what happens when you're alone at night, or when your partner does something that would have felt unforgivable in year 2 but now barely registers. That quiet absence of surprise, that lack of fight in your chest, that's the real signal underneath all the rewrites. The move is brutal, but simple. Ask yourself whether you're staying because this relationship is good or because leaving it would be expensive. Those are not the same thing. One builds a life, the other builds a prison with very good Wi-Fi. A shared lease, 100 reasons never to look at the door, and the slow recognition that you've become someone who settles, and somewhere deep, you already know which one you're in. Escalation of commitment to a grudge. You know that moment when someone says something thoughtless and you decide right then that they don't respect you? That first snap judgment usually feels solid, feels true, but then something strange happens over the next weeks and months. You stop noticing the times they do show up for you, and you start collecting evidence like a detective on a mission. A joke that lands wrong, a dinner invitation you think was half-hearted, a forwarded article that must mean they think you're stupid. Each piece of evidence feels like confirmation, and suddenly you've got a whole case file in your head about who they really are. The original hurt gets buried under layers of fresh grievances, most of them things they probably didn't even know bothered you. What started as one mistake has somehow become proof of a character flaw, and by now, you're so committed to that story that stepping back feels like admitting you were wrong all along. With a bad investment or failed project, you can cut your losses, but a relationship, a family member, the stakes feel personal in a way that makes backing down feel like self-betrayal, so you keep the grudge alive. Keep feeding it, because letting it go would mean forgiving what they did, and you're not ready. But here's what gets overlooked. The grudge isn't punishing them anymore. It's become your full-time job. You've tied your identity to being someone who was wronged, and that story now runs every conversation with them, poisoning 1,000 small moments that could have been neutral or even warm. The real cost isn't what they took from you, it's what the grudge is taking from you right now, every single day. The exit isn't about forgiveness or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about noticing when you've stopped reacting to what happened and started maintaining the narrative just to stay consistent with who you've decided to be, and asking whether that's actually who you want to be anymore. The forgiveness threshold. You know that moment when someone apologizes and you feel nothing? Not angry anymore, but not healed either. Just a hollow acknowledgement that floats there between you like a guest nobody invited. That gap is real, and it has a physics to it. Forgiveness isn't a binary switch. It's a threshold you cross slowly, and most people have no idea how many invisible steps they've already taken or how many are still left. Here's what trips most of us. We think forgiveness happens in an instant, usually when someone says the right words or cries hard enough. But what actually moves the needle is repetition and context. Did this person hurt you once and never again? Or is there a pattern? Did they acknowledge the damage, or did they minimize it? More crucially, and this is the part nobody talks about, did they change the behavior that caused the harm, or just the way they talk about it? There's a quiet arithmetic your brain runs constantly, tallying whether someone is genuinely different or just better at managing your perception of them. And here's the cruel part. You can't rush your own forgiveness by willing it faster, even when you desperately want to. Your nervous system knows the difference between forgiving someone and pretending you have, and it will betray you every time you try to skip that gap. You'll find yourself flinching at their tone. You'll remember the hurt right when things feel good. You'll test them repeatedly without meaning to, watching for signs they're really changed or just tired of apologizing. That's not a character flaw in you. That's your wisdom, protecting you. The threshold isn't cruel. It's the amount of time and consistency your own brain needs to rebuild trust, to rewire the memory of who they were into something closer to who you're beginning to believe they might be. The forgiveness is happening beneath the surface, even when you can't feel it. Until then, healing is still moving forward. You're just not there yet. Preemptive defection. You know that feeling when you suspect someone's about to leave you, so you cut them off first. You send fewer texts. You stop asking them to things. You pull back before they can pull back. It feels like you're protecting yourself, like you're staying ahead of the betrayal. What you're actually doing is making the betrayal happen yourself. Preemptive defection is when we sabotage a relationship or opportunity because we're certain, absolutely certain, that it's going to fail anyway. The logic feels airtight. If I'm the one who leaves, I'm not the one who gets left. If I walk away first, the rejection doesn't count. But here's where the trap springs shut. The person on the other side doesn't know about your internal doomsday forecast. They just experience you becoming colder, more distant, less invested. So they do what any reasonable person does. They match your energy and drift away. And then you get to say, "See, I was right," even though you manufactured the very outcome you feared. This happens in work too. You're convinced your boss doesn't respect you, so you start half-assing projects. You convince yourself you're being realistic, preparing for the inevitable firing. Instead, you're handing them a legitimate reason to reconsider your place on the team. The cruelest part is that you never actually find out if your prediction was true or pure anxiety wearing a costume of certainty. You'll never know if they would have stayed, promoted you, loved you deeper, because you left before they could even show you who they actually were in that moment. You spent so much energy running from rejection that you forgot to notice whether rejection was even coming. The next time you feel that pull to withdraw, try something smaller. Ask a real question, not a test. Is everything okay between us? Or do you still want to work together on this? Let the other person answer before you decide they've already left. Most of the time, they're right there, waiting for you to believe it enough to stay. Tit for tat misfire. You know that moment when someone cancels plans on you, so next time they ask for a favor, you find yourself hesitating, remembering what they did? That's not petty. That's a strategy that evolved to keep relationships fair. For decades, researchers believed tit for tat was almost perfect. Match what the other person does, cooperate if they cooperate, retaliate if they don't, and somehow harmony emerges. It works beautifully in controlled experiments, but real life has a fatal timing problem that nobody warns you about. When you're hurt by someone's action, you almost never see it the way they intended. You think they snubbed you. They think they were busy. You pull back. They feel the pullback and pull back harder, assuming you started it. Now you're both playing tit for tat, but you're responding to different games. She forgot your birthday. Intentional cruelty in your mind, but she was drowning in a work crisis. You give her the cold shoulder. She thinks you're angry without reason. She withdraws. You withdraw further. Two good strategies colliding in a hall of mirrors. The maddening part is that tit for tat only works when both players see the board the same way. When there's noise, misunderstanding, distraction, different mental maps, the strategy locks both people into a death spiral, neither intended. A text that reads as dismissive but was just rushed. A favor refused because you didn't know they needed it. A joke that landed wrong. And suddenly, you're both keeping score. Both convinced the other person is the one who started it. The fix isn't to try harder at reciprocity. It's to break the symmetry intentionally. Do something kind when you're hurt. Not because you're a saint, but because it actually interrupts the pattern. Give them a chance to see you as cooperative before they've already decided you're the enemy. The reset button isn't weakness. It's the only move that works when the mirrors are cracked. Noise in cooperation signals. Your partner does the dishes without you asking. You read it as love, but maybe they just needed a clean plate. Your boss laughs at your joke in the meeting. You think you're finally in the inner circle, but maybe they laugh at every joke, every single day, because that's just how they move through the world. Here's the friction. Cooperation signals are noisy as hell, and we are terrible at filtering the signal from the static. When someone acts kind or collaborative, we want it to mean they're invested in us, so we build a story around that one action and call it evidence. The noise, the random kindness, the habit-driven gesture, the thing they do for anyone, gets overlooked almost completely. You see it most clearly in new relationships or new jobs, when every small gesture lands heavy and strange. A text back fast feels like enthusiasm. An invitation to lunch feels like acceptance. A compliment in passing feels like you matter. But statistically, most of those gestures mean almost nothing on their own. They're background noise in their lives, no different than checking their email or scratching their head. What actually matters is whether the pattern holds under pressure, whether they show up when it's inconvenient, when nobody's watching, when there's nothing in it for them. Here's what gets most people. We interpret noise as signal when we're hungry for the signal. If If you need to belong, every smile looks like belonging. If you're anxious about whether someone trusts you, every mundane favor looks like proof that they do. The trick isn't to ignore the kindness. It's real, and it might be true, but to ask yourself what you'd need to see consistently, over months, to actually know. One email doesn't tell you how someone treats you when stakes are high. One laugh doesn't tell you if you're valued or just convenient. The people who change around you are often the ones who stopped confusing noise for meaning. They watched the pattern, not the gesture. They waited for the signal to repeat. Interrupting hierarchies. You walk into a meeting where everyone's quiet except the one person talking, the one with the title, the seniority, the space. Then someone junior makes a joke, and suddenly the room loosens. The hierarchy didn't disappear. It got interrupted. That interruption, even a small one, is what makes people relax enough to actually think differently around you. When you interrupt a social hierarchy, you're not attacking it. You're reminding people that the invisible rules holding them in place are made of consensus, not concrete. Most of us keep silent, not because we're afraid of one person, but because we're afraid of breaking the pattern everyone else is following. The pattern feels safer than the truth. But the moment someone speaks sideways to power, or laughs when everyone's supposed to be formal, or asks a dumb question that actually matters, something shifts in the room. People suddenly feel permitted to be more honest, to drop the performance they've been holding. You've lowered the stakes just by not performing the hierarchy the way it's supposed to be performed. Here's what actually matters. When you interrupt a hierarchy, even gently, you make it visible. Everyone knows it's there, but pretending it doesn't exist is what keeps it strong. Once it's visible, people start to question it. That question, that tiny moment of, "Wait, why are we acting like this?" is where real change begins to happen. It's not about disrespecting authority or being reckless or trying to prove something. It's about finding the small gesture, the small word, the small choice that says, "I see the structure, and I'm going to respond as a person, not as a rank." When you do that consistently over time, you become someone people suddenly change around, not because you're threatening or destabilizing, but because you've made it possible for them to be real. And that's when they start to trust you, and when they start to think more clearly, and when they start to show you who they actually are. Speaking time as power index. Sit in a meeting tomorrow and do something simple. Count who talks and for how long. Not the loudest voice, not the smartest point, just minutes. You will notice something uncomfortable. The person who talks the most is rarely the person with the fewest doubts. They are the person who has decided that their airtime is more important than the silence of others. That decision alone is a kind of power. In most groups, speaking time tracks almost perfectly with how much the person believes they matter in that room. And here is what makes it real. Everyone else unconsciously agrees. We treat talking time as evidence of importance. If someone speaks for 30 seconds, we file them as tentative. If they speak for 3 minutes without pause, we file them as confident, knowledgeable, in charge. Regardless of what they actually said, you have probably experienced the reverse. You had something true and valuable to offer, but you waited for the right moment, phrased it carefully, and by the time you spoke, someone else had already claimed the space. The room moved on. Your truth stayed small. This is not accidental. In families, the parent who talks most shapes the emotional weather. In offices, the interrupter sets the agenda. In friendships, the person who fills silences becomes the one everyone else orbits. They did not earn that orbit through better ideas. They earned it by deciding that hesitation was a luxury they could not afford. What shifts when you notice this is subtle but real. You stop equating volume with validity. You start listening for what people do not say. The ideas people hold back, because the airtime has already been claimed. And if you find yourself in a room where you want to matter, you already know what to do. Speak deliberately, as if your words are worth the air they take up. That small shift, from waiting for permission to simply taking your turn, rewires how people see you almost instantly. Vocal pitch and submission cues. Next time you're in a room where someone powerful enters, maybe your boss, a charismatic stranger, or someone you're nervous around, listen to what happens to people's voices. Not the words, the actual pitch. You'll catch something almost invisible. Voices climb higher, soften, lose their gravel. It's not a choice. It's older than language. Your nervous system is broadcasting submission without your consent, and everyone there can read it like a billboard. The science is stark. Lower pitch signals, dominance, stability, authority. Higher pitch signals, deference, uncertainty, need for approval. A man who lowers his voice when he's angry is signaling control. A woman who raises her voice when she's defending herself is often read as less credible, even when she's right, because her nervous system betrayed her into sounding small. You've probably had the eerie experience of talking to someone and realizing mid-conversation that they've stopped taking you seriously. Rewind the tape in your head. Your pitch likely climbed without you noticing. You felt nervous, your body tightened, and suddenly you sounded like you were asking permission instead of sharing information. The trap is that once your voice signals submission, people's brains lock you into that role. They stop leaning in. They interrupt more. They make faster decisions that favor themselves. The biology runs deep. Primate hierarchies have always sorted by sound. Your voice is your social thermostat, and the moment it rises, the room reads you differently. You can feel it happening in real time if you pay attention. That slight tightness in your throat when uncertain. That quick breath before you speak. Here's the practical edge. If you're about to do something that matters, a negotiation, a difficult conversation, a moment where you need to be heard, drop your pitch slightly before you speak. Not artificially, just a half step lower. Breathe deeper. Slow your pace. Let silence sit where you'd normally fill it. Your nervous system will notice and adjust. The room will feel the shift immediately. You haven't changed the facts or the content of what you're saying. You've changed how the facts land, and that changes how seriously people weigh them. The shift is small, the effect is permanent, and it reverses much faster than you'd think. Gaze duration thresholds. You lock eyes with someone across a room for maybe 2 seconds and feel a tiny spark of connection. 3 seconds and it feels intentional, almost intimate. 5 seconds and your nervous system starts to sing or scream, depending on context. There is a precise bandwidth where eye contact feels like presence, and step outside it in either direction and the whole social signal breaks down. That bandwidth is your gaze duration threshold, and it is wildly specific to culture, relationship, and moment. Most of us never consciously notice we are measuring it, yet we are constantly translating someone's stare into meaning. Are they interested, aggressive, lying, indifferent? The answer changes not based on what they are thinking, but on how long their eyes stay locked to yours. Here is where it gets weird. A person can love you and look away because sustained eye contact triggers their nervous system to feel exposed or unsafe. Another person can dislike you and hold your gaze because in their world, breaking first is weakness. You read the duration and assign motive, but motive is rarely what you think. A manager who holds your gaze during feedback might be showing confidence or trying to intimidate, masking anxiety with intense focus. A partner who looks away mid-conversation might be withdrawing, processing deeper emotion, or their brain simply needing a visual break to access memory. The trap is treating gaze duration like a lie detector when it is really just a mirror of nervous system state. What changes people around you is often not their feelings, but their threshold shifting. Stress lowers it, making someone who used to hold your gaze now look down. Attraction raises it, pulling eyes longer than usual. Power dynamics reshape it instantly. The moment someone feels judged, their threshold collapses. The moment they feel safe, it expands. If you want to shift how someone shows up around you, sometimes you are not changing their mind. You are changing how long they feel safe enough to be seen. Postural echo breakdown. Watch two people who've just met sit down at a coffee shop. One leans forward. Within minutes, the other leans forward too. One crosses their legs. The other follows. It feels like they're dancing without music, and it usually means they're comfortable with each other. Bodies mirroring as a sign of rapport. But what happens when the echo stops? That's when things get interesting. And honestly, that's what most people miss. When someone stops mirroring your posture, it doesn't always mean they dislike you. Sometimes it means they've shifted into a different kind of attention. They might be thinking hard about what you said, pulling back into their own mind. They might be getting ready to disagree, or they might simply be distracted by their phone buzzing in their pocket. We are wired to notice when someone mirrors us. It feels safe, validating, like we're on the same wavelength. So when it stops, your nervous system picks up on it before your conscious mind does. Suddenly they feel distant distant, even if they're saying warm words. You start second-guessing the whole conversation. Did I say something wrong? Are they mad at me? Here's the trap. Postural echo breakdowns happen for dozens of mundane reasons, but we almost always interpret them as rejection or judgment. A shift in posture might mean nothing except that their back is tired, or they're uncomfortable in the chair, or they just got a text that's bothering them. But because we've learned to read mirroring as connection, we read the absence of it as disconnection. The fix is gentler than you'd think. Next time you notice someone stop echoing your posture, try the opposite of what anxiety wants. Lean back yourself, change your angle, ask a question that invites them to re-engage. Most of the time, they'll follow again, and you'll remember that the dance was never about perfect symmetry. It was always about whether someone was willing to move with you at all. Nonverbal leakage under strain. You watch someone insist they're fine while their leg bounces under the table at a speed that suggests they're running from something invisible. They say the meeting went great, but their jaw is clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. The words are one story. The body is writing another. That gap, where what we're trying to project cracks and truth leaks out, is called nonverbal leakage, and it happens precisely when we care most about controlling the narrative. When stakes are low, and we don't care what someone thinks, we're relaxed, congruent, whole. But the moment we need to hide something, convince someone, or hold back emotion, the mask gets busy, and masks have seams. Your hands betray you first, usually. Fidgeting, touching your face, gripping something too hard. These aren't random. They're anxiety looking for an outlet when your conscious mind is busy managing your words. Your eyes leak too. The pupils dilate when you're stressed or lying. You blink more often. Your voice gets higher, faster, or develops a tremor. You touch your neck, your chest, your arms, self-soothing gestures that only activate when something inside is triggered. The cruel part is that most people feel none of this happening. You're completely convinced you're pulling it off while your fingers are drumming a panic rhythm on your thigh. Here's what matters. When you spot the leakage in someone else, a pause, a stiffness, a micro-expression that flashed across their face, you've just seen a moment of truth they didn't intend to share. It doesn't mean they're lying outright. It means something in what they said, or in the situation itself, created internal friction. The real catch is this: almost nobody notices their own leakage, but everyone notices it in you. The next move is gentleness. Leakage happens because the person is already managing something hard. Pushing into that tension usually makes them clamp down harder. If you listen instead, stay quiet. Maybe repeat back what you heard without judgment. Sometimes the real story finds its own way out. Proxemic violation response. Someone steps too close to you in line and suddenly your shoulders tense. You don't consciously decide to feel cornered. Your nervous system just knows. That invisible ring around your body, the one you're not aware you're protecting, gets breached and something primal fires. That reaction is not rude. It is not personal. It is biology wearing clothes. Every animal has a perimeter, and humans are no different. We've just dressed it up with politeness and pretended we don't notice when someone crosses it. But we do notice. Your amygdala notices. Your muscles notice. Here is where it gets real. The size of that invisible ring changes depending on who is in it. A stranger's elbow grazing yours on a crowded train feels invasive. Your child's hug feels like home. Your boss leaning over your shoulder feels like surveillance. Your best friend in the same position feels like connection. So the violation is not really about the distance. It is about whether that person has earned the right to be there. When someone has not, when a coworker leans in too close during a conversation, or a relative stands at your shoulder without invitation, something shifts in how you relate to them for the rest of the interaction. You become guarded. You physically back away. You might smile, but your eyes cool. You are not overreacting. You are following a script written millions of years ago. Distance from the unknown is safety. Most people never realize this is happening. They step closer thinking it builds intimacy, and you retreat feeling invaded, and neither of you understands why the whole conversation now feels off. Watch what your body does the next time someone violates your space, and you suddenly seem less interested in them. The shift happens before your thoughts catch up. It is not about them as a person. It is about permission. You can give it back by leaning in first, by softening your posture, by inviting them closer with your whole presence, or you can let the distance speak for itself and watch how they read that language perfectly, even if they never hear it out loud. Touch permission renegotiation. Someone you've known for years used to hug you without asking. Then one day they hesitate, reach out, pull back, maybe offer a hand instead. What just happened? The most human thing possible. The rules changed, and nobody announced it. Touch is the oldest language we speak, but it's also the one nobody wants to negotiate out loud. We prefer it to just happen, like it's written in stone. But here's the truth. As relationships shift, so does the physical boundary. Your grandmother who kissed your cheek every visit might need space after grief rewires her nervous system. Your best friend who collapsed into you during heartbreak might protect their body now that they're healing. Your sibling might suddenly feel more formal because something shifted in how you relate to each other. A coworker you've known for a decade might step back because a boundary violation from someone else has made them more careful with everyone. The renegotiation happens mostly in silence. A leaning in that doesn't land, a hug that feels briefer than it used to, a touch that carries apology or caution or tenderness the old version didn't require. Most people read this as rejection. It isn't. It's recalibration. Your job, if you care about someone, is to notice it without making them explain it. A person's body permission isn't a promise from the past. It's consent happening in real time. And it shifts, sometimes because they hurt, sometimes because they're building a boundary they needed all along, sometimes because you've changed and they're adjusting to meet a version of you they're still getting to know, sometimes because their nervous system is protecting them from something you'll never fully understand. The warmth doesn't disappear when the hug does. It lives in a different space. Watch for it, and if you feel yourself wanting to touch someone the way you used to, let that tiny moment of hesitation tell you something true, something they may not have words for yet. Silence interpreted as verdict. Your friend reads your text and doesn't reply for 3 hours. Immediately, your brain fills the gap. They're upset, they're judging you, they're done with you. The silence becomes a sentence. It becomes a courtroom where you're the defendant and the verdict is already in. But here's what actually happened. They were in a meeting, they forgot, they didn't see it, and yet you spent those 3 hours rewriting your entire relationship based on the absence of words. This is the gravity well of human attention. We hate empty space more than we hate bad news, so we rush to fill it with the worst-case story that fits. A partner comes home quiet, and you know immediately they're angry at you. A colleague stops liking your posts, and you've already mentally fired yourself. A family member takes longer to text back, and you're constructing narratives of betrayal. Silence is just silence. It's the absence of a sound. But your mind treats it as data, and data that means something important, something that matters. The trap is that you will defend this interpretation with all the evidence your brain can manufacture. You'll remember the time they were mad 3 weeks ago. You'll notice small details that confirm the verdict. You'll adjust your behavior preemptively, becoming distant or withdrawn, which then actually creates the problem you were avoiding. And the worst part? Sometimes they sense your shift and retreat too, and now the silence becomes real. The pattern locks. The imagined verdict becomes actual. The story hardens into fact. The move is not to ignore the silence or pretend it doesn't exist. That doesn't work either. It's to name it directly and break the spell before the narrative calcifies. I noticed I haven't heard from you, and my brain went somewhere dark. That's me, not you. Are you okay? Short, honest, breaks the amplification loop before it becomes irreversible. Silence will always be ambiguous, but you don't have to be its translator. Delayed reply, meaning inflation. You send a message, 3 minutes pass, then an hour, then the next morning. When the reply finally lands, you've already written a whole narrative. They're mad, they're losing interest, they're pulling away. But here's what actually happened. They were in a meeting. Their phone was in another room. They forgot and got distracted by dinner. The delay had almost nothing to do with you and everything to do with their Tuesday. Yet by the time you see those words, you've already lived through a small story of rejection that rewrote what the reply will mean before it ever arrived. This is meaning inflation. The human brain's habit of filling empty time with emotional weight it never earned. A friend doesn't laugh at your joke, and suddenly they think you're unfunny. A partner takes longer than usual to text back, and you feel the distance widening. A colleague doesn't immediately acknowledge your email, and you wonder if you've offended them. The gap itself becomes the evidence, and by the time it closes, you're reading the response through the lens of the story you invented to survive the waiting. These invented narratives feel like facts by the time they're proven wrong. If they're proven wrong at all, often you never ask. You just adjust your behavior, pull back a little, add a layer of caution to the next interaction, And sometimes, the other person feels that shift and genuinely does pull back, which confirms your original theory. The cycle completes itself. What breaks it is recognizing that empty time is just empty. It's not a message at all. Before you assign meaning to silence, try naming what you're actually feeling in the gap. Anxiety, impatience, old hurt from being ignored before. That feeling is real and valid. The story about what the delay means, that's just a guess. Next time you're watching those three dots appear and disappear, notice the difference between the silence and the meaning you're pouring into it. The silence belongs to them. The meaning belongs to you. Text tone catastrophizing. You send a message at 11 p.m., something casual, maybe slightly funny, then silence. An hour passes, nothing. Your mind does not wait. It fills the gap with a tone of voice you can hear crystal clear, cold, disappointed, angry. By the time you see three dots, you have already written an entire argument in your head, cast yourself as the villain, and decided the other person is withdrawing. What actually happened was they were brushing their teeth. But your nervous system does not know that. It only knows absence. And absence is where catastrophe lives. Text tone catastrophizing happens when your brain takes a medium that strips away every signal it evolved to read. Body language, vocal warmth, breathing, eye contact, and fills that void with the worst possible interpretation. It is not stupidity. It is your threat detection system doing exactly what it was built to do. Assume danger when data is missing. The problem is that text has become the primary way we maintain intimacy, and your ancient wiring has no instruction manual for it. A period feels cold. A delayed response feels like rejection. Lowercase reads as dismissal. They did not use an emoji when they usually do, and suddenly, that tiny absence becomes evidence of something wrong. None of these things mean anything. They are just the random texture of a Tuesday, but they feel like they mean everything because your system has learned to treat silence as a signal. Your brain is not broken. It is just working in a medium it was never designed for. The moment you notice yourself narrating a tone into flat text, pause and ask what you are actually reading versus what you are projecting onto it. Send a tiny clarifying message if you need to. Better yet, call. Your voice, the one thing text stripped away, is the fastest way to remember that most people are not mad at you. They are just living their lives, often in the middle of something unglamorous. The text will still be there when they check it, and the panic you manufactured will dissolve the moment you hear their actual voice. Recency contamination of trust. Your best friend shows up late to lunch. You made reservations. You waited 20 minutes in the restaurant bar, watching the door, your jaw getting tighter. By the time they arrive, breathless with apologies. Traffic, a work crisis, a genuine mess. Something in how you greet them is already different. Not destroyed, but cooler. And here's the trap. Your brain is doing a thing called recency contamination of trust, where the most recent moment gets to rewrite the entire history of who someone is. That one late arrival doesn't delete the 100 times they were early. The broken promise doesn't erase a decade of kept ones. But in your nervous system, in the moment, it feels like it does. This is especially brutal in relationships that matter most because those are the ones where you've built the tallest tower of trust, and one shaky block at the top makes the whole structure feel unsafe. What happens next is often invisible. You don't consciously decide they're unreliable. Instead, you start interpreting their other behavior through the lens of that recent failure. They text back slowly. Now it feels like they don't care, when a month ago, you would have assumed they were busy. They cancel plans. Now it feels like they're pulling away, when before you'd have understood their schedule got chaotic. You even start rewriting history. That time they were late before? You suddenly remember it with fresh resentment, as if the pattern was always there. The most insidious part is that they feel the shift in you before you've even named it to yourself. They sense the suspicion and often respond by pulling back, which your contaminated brain reads as more proof that something has changed. The cycle tightens into something neither of you intended. Breaking it requires something unglamorous. Remembering that people are not their worst recent moments, and that your most recent hurt is a lens, not evidence of character. Before you let recency rewrite someone's entire story, ask yourself what you're actually seeing, them today or them through last week's pain. Peak end memory of you. You spent 6 hours with someone, really present, laughing, sharing real things. Then, at the very end, a small tension blooms. A misunderstanding. Nothing terrible, but it lands wrong in the moment. Weeks later, when they think of that day, the whole afternoon dissolves like it never happened. What sticks, what they actually carry, is that final moment of awkwardness. This is not a glitch in how memory works. This is the design. Your brain does not file away an average of the experience, some blended middle ground between the highs and lows. It files away the peak, the most intense emotional spike. Plus, how things ended, the golden middle, no matter how real and warm it was, gets overwritten. Neuroscientists call this the peak end rule, and it explains why someone can have a genuinely good time with you and leave feeling like something was fundamentally off. Your last words, your tone in the final exchange, the way you closed the door or ended the text thread, these do not merely add to the memory. They become the entire memory in retrospect. That final 5 minutes recolors everything that came before it, like a filter applied to a photograph. This matters because you cannot control how people interpret a whole relationship or what they bring to it emotionally, but you absolutely can control how they leave it. Someone might have felt genuinely cared for all evening, but if you rush them out the door or end on a sour note, that care evaporates from the official record. Conversely, you can have a mediocre hangout that transforms into a treasured memory if the ending is warm, deliberate, genuine. Conversely, you can rescue a rough afternoon with a real goodbye. Slow down the goodbye. Name something specific you noticed about them. End with something that lands soft. That final gesture, that closing tone, is what they will carry forward and replay when they are alone. It becomes the story they tell themselves about who you are and what time with you actually means. Status recalculation in real time. Walk into a room where a friend is mid-conversation with someone you don't recognize and watch what happens next. Their whole energy shifts. They turn slightly away from the stranger. Language becomes more careful. They laugh a bit harder at your joke than they would alone. It's not malice. It's something automatic and primal. They just recalculated your status relative to theirs, and the room rearranged itself in milliseconds. Your brain contains a mental balance sheet for every person in your life, where they sit relative to you on competence, wealth, attractiveness, power, belonging. The moment circumstances change that calculus, the way people treat you changes too. A promotion shifts things, a visible failure, a new friendship, a weight loss, a connection to someone powerful. Here's what makes it tricky. People don't always know they're doing it. They experience the shift as genuine. Suddenly they're being themselves around you differently, when really their estimation of your value just moved. It can feel like betrayal when it's actually just neurology firing underneath the surface. Your ex-coworker becomes warmer after you get hired somewhere prestigious. Your confident friend goes quieter when you land the opportunity they wanted. A group makes space for you when you're with someone they respect, then contracts when you're alone. A person who ignored you for years suddenly texts after they see your work get recognition. None of this means they're bad people. It means they're human, and humans are status-tracking animals built by evolution to know where they stand in the hierarchy. The move here isn't to judge them for it. It's to recognize it's happening, so you stop taking the temperature swings personally. When someone's energy around you shifts, ask yourself what just changed in how they see your relative positions. That small shift in attention often reveals the real story underneath. You'll find the answer has less to do with who you are and everything to do with what you represent in that moment and what they suddenly need from you or fear losing to you.